Chapter 3981. But you've already used up all your power. You'll die if you last another 6 hours. The burial of heaven roared anxiously. All along as the sword's soul, it had always been very calm and taciturn at all times. Even its words were cold and emotionless. But today it was unexpectedly more talkative, and it even had emotions. It's okay. I have a supreme-grade divine artifact protecting me. I won't die. At most I'll use up all my divine power and enter a weak state. Xianxia shook his head and continued to swing his sword to block the incoming meteors. If it was before, he could cut this meteor with a diameter of 20,000 miles with one strike. But now he could only cut it in half and neutralize most of the impact. The two halves of the meteor were still as fast as lightning. It brushed past him and crashed into Thousand Blue Planet behind him. Boom, boom. In just a few dozen breaths, the two halves of the meteors hit Thousand Blue Planet's spatial barrier. Instantly, two huge holes appeared on the blue barrier on the surface of Thousand Blue Planet. Countless shards of divine light flew out. The two meteors fell on Thousand Blue Planet. One destroyed millions of miles of mountains and forests. The other crashed into the vast sea and created a huge whirlpool of 50,000 miles wide. Huge waves tens of thousands of feet high swept across millions of miles. Several countries and hundreds of cities by the sea were swallowed by the shocking tsunami. Millions of beings were killed on the spot. Xianxia only glanced at Thousand Blue Planet's situation. He didn't observe it closely. A hint of seriousness flashed through his eyes. He continued to focus on the meteors in front of him. He controlled the two supreme-grade divine artifacts to block more meteors. His divine power was about to run out. He could only absorb the power of the 5 elemental world to quickly replenish himself. As time passed, his condition and combat power quickly recovered. Even so, the 5 elemental world couldn't replenish his divine power as fast as he used it. He had no choice but to absorb the power of the heaven-mending orb. With the power of the 5 elemental world and the heaven-mending orb, he lasted another 4 hours. However, the power he used to replenish the 5 elemental world was basically used up this time. The originally flourishing and rapidly expanding world of 5 elements had become stagnant and calm like a pool of stagnant water. Even the brilliance of the heaven-mending pearl was not as dazzling as before. It was slightly dimmer. In these 4 hours he intercepted another 30,000 meteorites. More and more meteors could only helplessly give up and watch as they rushed into the depths of the void and crashed into the waste stars. One after another, the useless stars were blasted into smithereens, erupting into a terrifying star storm that affected 14 stars. There were also many meteorites that Xianxia was unable to destroy. He only managed to cut them in half and neutralize the huge impact. The shattered meteors flew past him and hit Thousand Blue Star and a few other stars. Many holes and craters appeared in the spatial barriers of the stars. Meteors with flaming tails fell like meteors, causing great disasters on those planets. Tens of millions of miles of mountains and rivers were turned into ruins. Countless cities and kingdoms were destroyed, burned into scorched earth. Hundreds of millions of non-humankind beings had been killed by the impact of the meteors. In the distorted space-time, Yunyao, Jiku, Jiwushuang, and the others had already finished their cultivation. They gathered together and stood on the jade platform under the sacred tree, using their divine abilities to watch the scene in the void. When they saw that Xianxia was completely drenched, his hair was disheveled and he was extremely weak, but he was still tenaciously holding on. Their eyes became blurry. Xianxia risked his life and blocked the meteors without caring about anything, just to save trillions of people he did not know. This caused everyone to be deeply shocked, respectful and impressed. Especially Chao Qingyu, Lon Yang, Baifeng and the others. Their emotions were very complicated. Young Master is actually willing to risk his life and save more than a dozen stars for the outsiders who are completely unrelated to him. Such breadth of mind and feelings is truly rare in the world, noble and unparalleled. In the past I always thought that the stronger a god is, the more emotionless and selfish they are. However, young Master used his actions to prove that the greater the power, the greater the responsibility. Mortals always believe in gods devoutly and pray that gods can protect them. However, too many gods are selfish and indifferent, not worthy of belief and respect at all. Only a god like young Master is worthy of the worship and reverence of billions of people. I can only use one word to describe young Master's actions: great. Although we are weak and can't help young master, we can't even block a meteor. However, I feel that we can't stand by and do nothing anymore. We also have to help young master." While everyone was discussing with emotion, Wuxuang's face was also full of tears. She clenched her fists and was extremely worried for her father. "Mother, why is father so foolish? Those outsiders don't even know him and are not related to him. Why would he risk his life to save them?" Ji Wuxuang hugged Yunyao's arm and begged her mother to let her father give up. She did not care if those stars and outsiders would be destroyed because of this. She only cared about her father's safety. She did not want to see her father in such a sorry state, nor did she want to see her father injured. Yunyao stared at the light screen in front of her. She looked at the vast void and Ji Tianxing's sorry figure. Her eyes were also covered with a layer of mist, and her heart was in her throat. However, she could still maintain her calm and said earnestly, "Wuxuang, your father was never an ordinary person. He was different. He carried the mission of reviving the human race and also the mission of saving the Dragon Realm and the Five Elements world. Since he recovered to the Divine King Realm, everything he did was to save the world. In his eyes, the outsiders might be ignorant and uncivilized, but they are also living beings under the heavenly Tao. He has the ability to turn the tide and save the world, so he can't just stand by and watch them die. His love and selflessness is something that no divine king can compare to." Ji Wuxuang nodded as if she understood and said, "Although I also know that father is great, I really don't want to see him injured. Also, doing this will only put his life in danger. There are no benefits at all." Ji Ku held Wuxuang's hand and patted her shoulder. He comforted her and said, "Wuxuang, with your father's current strength, he doesn't care about any benefits. Also, other than the heavens, I'm afraid no one has the right to give him any benefits or rewards. We humans have an old saying, the heavens are watching what people do. You have to believe that the heavens have eyes. What your father did was a great achievement in saving the world. The heavens will definitely reward him with great merit." Ji Wuxuang frowned and asked, "The heavenly Tao will remember father's achievements and reward him with merit? But what kind of reward is merit?" Ji Ku revealed a faint smile and explained, "Merit is something that can't be explained or explained clearly. But directly speaking, it should be the Tao and the power of the heavenly Tao." Chapter 3982. After hearing Ji Ku's words of comfort, Ji Wuxuang felt a little better. She was not an expert or a wise person. She was just a 13-year-old girl, Ji Tianxing and Yunyao's daughter. Therefore she did not have any noble and selfless feelings. She only had the most sincere feelings for her parents. If she had to choose between her father and the billions of living beings, she would choose her father without a doubt. However, if her father decided to do something, even if it meant risking his life, as long as he thought it was worth it and could be recognized and rewarded by the heavenly Tao, she would feel much better. At that moment, Yang, Chao Qingyu, Bai Feng, and the others all suggested that they would help Ji Tianxing. Yun Yao and Ji Ku looked at each other and nodded in agreement without hesitation. Swoosh, swoosh. In the next instant, everyone flew out of the distorted space-time and appeared behind Ji Tianxing in the void. Not only did Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wuxuang, White Dragon, Chao Qingyu, Yang, and Bai Feng appear, but even Qian Yu, Black Dragon, Lin Shui, and the Blood Illusion God King appeared. Everyone who had followed Ji Tianxing, including those who had reached the God King realm, stood out. Ji Tianxing had just destroyed a meteorite with his divine hammer when he suddenly realized that everyone had appeared behind him. He immediately looked anxious. "What are you doing here? It's too dangerous here. Go back." Although everyone was a God King, most of them were mid-level or low-level God Kings. If they were hit by a meteorite, even if they did not die, they would be severely injured. How could Ji Tianxing not be anxious? White Dragon was very emotional. He shouted excitedly, "Master, we can't let you fight alone. We're with you. We want to fight alongside you." "Nonsense." Ji Tianxing scolded angrily. "Those meteorites are star cores and star fragments. Any one of them can severely injure you. Go back to the Divine Pagoda and stay there." Everyone understood that he had good intentions. Seeing that he was angry, no one dared to say anything. At this moment, Yun Yao looked at him gently and explained, "Tianxing, of course we can't stop those meteorites. However, your divine power has been exhausted and you are too weak. Everyone is worried about your safety. Therefore we will work together to channel divine power to you and help you persevere. We all believe in you. As long as you haven't fallen, we will be safe." Ji Ku, Bai Long, Ji Wushuang, and the others quickly nodded in agreement. This. Ji Tianxing hesitated for a moment. He didn't dare to delay or be distracted, so he quickly nodded and agreed. All right, then all of you stand behind me. Don't act rashly. Having received his approval, everyone was overjoyed and their spirits were lifted. Qianyu snickered. She squinted her eyes and said to Black Dragon, "Did you see that? Yao Yao's words are always effective. The first wife is just different." Black Dragon blinked and sent a voice transmission. According to the human world, shouldn't Yun Yao and Ji Ku be called first wife and second wife? While the two of them were still muttering, everyone had already consciously arranged themselves into a formation. Yun Yao was at the front, followed by Ji Ku. Behind them were Lan Er, Ji Wushuang, Bai Long, and the others. Everyone worked together to release their divine power. After passing through layers of transmission, Yun Yao sent it into Ji Tianxing's body. Originally, Ji Tianxing was exhausted and his divine power was empty. Now that he had received everyone's divine power, he was immediately invigorated and his divine power became much more abundant. He focused on controlling the divine weapon and swung the Kenshin sword to block one meteorite after another. At this moment, the meteor shower had already reached its end. There were only about 16,000 meteorites left. As long as they could hold on for another 2 hours, the meteor shower would be gone. Ji Tianxing didn't dare to be careless. He focused all of his attention on dealing with the meteorites. Their unity was like an impregnable fortress. As they worked together, their efficiency was greatly increased. One meteorite after another was shattered into pieces by him and fell into the void. Only a few meteorites were abandoned and rushed into the depths of the void, smashing into many useless stars. As a result, loud bangs continuously erupted in the void hundreds of millions of miles away. Those shattered star fragments carried a terrifying force and bombarded a few stars. The spatial barriers of those stars were riddled with holes, and divine light flickered chaotically. The mountains and earth on the stars were also destroyed into ruins. Countless cities and divine kingdoms were destroyed. However, compared to the destruction of the entire star, the deaths of the tens of millions of aliens were not worth mentioning. As time passed, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others used up too much of their divine power and became weaker and weaker. However, everyone was infected by Ji Tianxing's aura and persevered with their strong willpower. From beginning to end, no one complained about being tired and no one thought of giving up. After following Ji Tianxing for so many years, they had learned a lot. Not only their experience and knowledge in cultivation, but also their willpower, perseverance, and persistence. Finally, 2 hours later, the meteor shower was over. When the last meteorite was shattered by Ji Tianxing's sword, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Everyone's hair and clothes were drenched in sweat. They looked very tired and weary. However, no one complained or complained. Everyone's spirits were lifted, and their faces were filled with pride and pride. We did it. To be able to fight side by side with young master and save more than 10 worlds, we are proud of you. Although we were fighting for strange creatures, this was a great battle. I feel that my divine soul and character have been elevated. From now on, I am also a noble expert who has saved a world. Everyone was full of smiles and high fives in celebration. Even the weakest and most disheveled Ji Tianxing squeezed out a smile on his pale face. He turned back to look at everyone and pointed at the dozens of stars that were full of holes. Although those stars are still injured and those aliens still have a lot of casualties, we managed to avert a crisis. However, we have successfully averted a calamity and saved more than a dozen worlds. The heavens have eyes. This is an undeniable achievement and also a great merit. Although no one can obtain any substantial benefits, I believe that your views and thoughts will be broader. In the future, when you become peak divine kings, you will also be able to comprehend the Tao faster and control the power of the heavenly Tao. In fact, this was part of the reason why Ji Tianxing decided to save more than 10 stars. Previously, he forced a few people to swear the heavenly Tao oath, and they were all recognized by the heavenly Tao. This made him very sure that the heavenly Tao did exist, and it was watching over all living beings at all times. Therefore, he wanted to save more than 10 worlds and make a shocking achievement. Even if he could not obtain the heavenly Tao merit, at least he could comprehend the Tao faster and control the power of the heavenly Tao. Of course, this was just a guess and a test. He could not be sure. Just as he finished speaking, a series of muffled thunder sounded in the void without any warning. In the next instant, more than 10 sacred golden light pillars descended from the void. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Everyone who was immersed in excitement and pride was engulfed by the sacred golden light before they could react. Not only Yunyao Jiku and the others, but even the burial of heaven was engulfed by a thick light pillar. Everyone's empty divine power immediately recovered at an unbelievable speed. Moreover, all kinds of enlightenment appeared in everyone's mind. Their talent, comprehension, aptitude, and strength had all improved significantly. Chapter 3983. Such a miraculous change stunned everyone. One had to know that everyone's talent, perception, and aptitude were fixed. Only an extremely small number of heaven and earth treasures could increase a cultivator's attributes. Therefore, after everyone was enveloped by the sacred golden light, their talent and perception skyrocketed, and they could not react in time. After a while, everyone finally came back to their senses and cheered in surprise. Jiku shouted excitedly, "Big Brother Tianqing is right. We have made great contributions and have indeed been rewarded by the heavenly Tao. This is the power of merit from the heavenly Tao." Only then did everyone come to a realization. They were overjoyed and excited. "Oh my God! We have actually been rewarded by the heavenly Tao. Young Master was right. We have been recognized by the heavenly Tao. What a miraculous power of merit. Not only did it save me 100 years of hard work, but it also increased my talent and aptitude. Such a great opportunity is definitely not something that can be exchanged for hundreds of billions of cultivation resources." Everyone was immersed in excitement and ecstasy. Only Ji Wushuang kept staring at his exhausted father and asked in shock, "Father, you have put in the most effort and made the most contributions. Why didn't you receive the heavenly Tao's reward?" Hearing that, everyone was stunned and turned to look at Ji Tianqing. As expected, everyone was enveloped by the sacred golden light. Even the sword of the burial of heaven was no exception. Only Ji Tianqing's surroundings were very calm. There was no power of merit at all. It seemed that not only did he not receive the heavenly Tao's reward, but he had also been neglected and forgotten. Yunyao Jiku and the others all had puzzled looks on their faces. They were all puzzled. How could this be? Tianqing is clearly the greatest contributor. Why didn't the heavenly Tao bestow him with the power of merit? This shouldn't be. All living beings are under the watch of the heavenly Tao, and the heavenly Tao is absolutely fair and selfless. Why would it miss him? Something must have gone wrong somewhere. Maybe it's because young master's contributions are too great that the heavenly Tao wants to give him the grandest reward. Yes, that's most likely. In the eyes of everyone, they had only helped a little and obtained the power of merit bestowed by the heavenly Tao. With the impartiality of the heavenly Tao, it would definitely give Ji Tianqing the greatest reward. In fact, it was not only the power of virtue that was given to him, but there were also other rewards. Thinking of this possibility, everyone waited for Ji Tianqing to receive the reward while being baptized by the power of merit. Unfortunately, an hour had passed. Everyone had refined their own power of virtue and recovered to their peak condition. Their strength had also increased. However, there was still no movement on Ji Tianqing's side. There was no divine golden light and there was no sign of the heavenly Tao. At this moment, everyone had no choice but to confirm that Ji Tianqing had indeed been forgotten by the heavenly Tao. How could this be? Isn't the heavenly Tao the most just and selfless? How could I have missed Big Brother Tianqing? Master, do you feel any abnormalities? Or did the heavenly Tao give you any rewards? Everyone felt indignant for Ji Tianqing and asked him about the situation. Ji Tianqing was also very puzzled. However, he was afraid that everyone would be worried, so he comforted them with a calm expression. "Don't worry, everyone. The heavenly Tao is naturally impartial. The reward it gave me is just different from yours." Everyone was skeptical. Yunyao Jiku and Ji Wushuang were still a little indignant and felt deeply regretful. Ji Tianqing took out the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and said, "All right, everyone, don't let your imagination run wild. Quickly return to the pagoda and cultivate in seclusion. The benefits that the power of merit brought to you are far more than this. You have to seriously cultivate in seclusion for a few years and properly digest the benefits brought by the power of merit." Seeing that the void had returned to calm and that there was no danger ahead, everyone entered the distorted space-time one after another to cultivate in seclusion. Yun Yao and Jiku were the last to enter the pagoda. Before leaving, the two of them carefully reminded Ji Tianxing. Tianxing, your strength is now empty and you are also injured. Quickly follow us to the pagoda to recuperate. Big brother Tianxing, the calamity has been resolved. You don't have to worry about the alien creatures on the dozen or so planets. First, heal your injuries. Ji Tianxing nodded to show that he understood. After comforting them for a while, they entered the pagoda. In the void, only Ji Tianxing and the Sword of Burial of Heaven were left. The primordial chaos bell and the thunder hammer had already flown back to his side and were stored in his body. He forcefully supported his weak body and sat cross-legged in the void. He placed the Sword of Burial of Heaven in front of his knees and took out a large number of divine pills to consume. As he consumed the divine pills to recover his strength, he discussed this matter with the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Although I didn't explain it to you before, when I decided to intercept the meteorites and save the dozen or so planets, I had this idea in mind. I wanted to use this opportunity to see if the heavenly Tao would reward me or let me condense the Tao runes in advance. Facts have proven that I succeeded. I have made such a great contribution and will indeed be rewarded by the heavenly Tao. However, why can even you be rewarded with the power of merit by the heavenly Tao, but I don't have any? The Sword of Burial of Heaven knew that although he looked calm on the surface, he was actually very depressed. However, the Sword of Burial of Heaven did not know how to explain to him. He could only say in a low voice, "This matter is indeed very strange. If even you can't figure it out, I can't understand it either. Even if I fought side by side with you, intercepted the meteorites and saved trillions of lives, I am still a sword spirit after all. But I'm just a sword soul, so how could I be rewarded by the heavenly Tao? Could it be that the heavenly Tao has judged me as a living creature?" Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment. Then he nodded and said, "That should be the case." The primordial chaos bell and the divine hammer also participated in intercepting the meteorites. However, they don't have weapon spirits, so they didn't receive the heavenly Tao's reward. But why can't I get the power of merit? Why can't I comprehend the power of the heavenly Tao and the Tao runes? I took such a huge risk and it was all for nothing? The Sword of Burial of Heaven tried to analyze. Could it be that the heavenly Tao has left you out? Or rather, you once interfered with the power of the heavenly Tao and reincarnated with the memory of your soul. So, you have been excluded by the heavenly Tao? In his previous life, Kenshin was one of the best among the peak divine kings. He had already mastered a trace of the power of the heavenly Tao. Before he died, he used the Heaven Punishment Array to interfere with the heavenly Tao's reincarnation. Therefore, he could reincarnate with the memory of his soul under the protection of the Heaven Punishment Array. Hearing the Sword of Burial of Heaven's reminder, he nodded slightly and said, "Your analysis is somewhat reasonable. Perhaps this is the reason." Well, just as he was about to nod and confirm this answer, he suddenly remembered something. "'Cause situation is similar to mine. Back then, I interfered with the power of the heavenly Tao and used the heavenly star chain to protect a remnant of her soul to reincarnate in the human world. If the heavenly Tao has left me out, then she should also be excluded. However, you also saw it just now. She also received the power of merit. This time, even the Sword of Burial of Heaven was confused and speechless. Ji Tianxing guessed many possibilities, but he could only deny them. In short, this matter became a mystery. Chapter 3984. Alright, I can't figure this out for now, but there will be an answer in the future. You're too weak right now and you're still injured. Treat your injuries first. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was still confused and trying to figure out the answer, the Burial of Heaven hurriedly sent him a message. Ji Tianxing thought for a long time but couldn't figure it out. He could only put this problem aside for now and think about it later. He entered the sword world and returned to the distorted space to treat his injuries. His injuries weren't caused by the meteors. He had used up all of his divine power and overused his potential body and mind. He had injured himself. Although his injuries weren't serious, they had damaged his divine path foundation. He would have to recuperate for at least a few years before he could recover. Fortunately, he had more than 1 trillion worth of cultivation resources in his hands. When he was in seclusion to treat his injuries, he didn't lack cultivation resources or divine pills. The Burial of Heaven flew alone in the void towards the dozen or so stars to check the situation. 12 hours later, the Burial of Heaven entered the closest star, Thousand Blue Star. Of the 14 stars, Thousand Blue Star was at the front and bore the brunt of the attack. If Ji Tianxing hadn't stopped the meteors, Thousand Blue Star would have been the first to be destroyed. Although Thousand Blue Star had survived, the surface of the star was full of holes. The meteor fragments had pierced through many holes. The burial of heaven circled half of Thousand Blue Star and saw countless ruins and scorched earth. It made a rough estimate. At least 1,000 cities and 700 to 800 million foreign beings had died under the meteor fragments. The surroundings of the ruins and scorched earth could be said to be filled with wails. It was unknown how many foreign race creatures were crying and wailing. But this was only the minority. Compared to the entire Thousand Blue Star, less than 1% of the foreign beings had died. 99% of the foreign beings saw that the void had calmed down and the meteor shower had disappeared. They were overjoyed. Countless people cheered in high spirits, shouting and roaring with all their might, venting the surprise and excitement in their hearts. Although they didn't know how the apocalyptic calamity had disappeared, they were lucky enough to survive. However, they were extremely lucky to have survived. It was worth celebrating for 7 days and 7 nights. Countless non-humankind creatures danced and sang, expressing their excitement. At the same time, many outsiders swarmed towards the statues of the realm masters and paragon deities in the cities like Tidewater. They prostrated themselves on the ground and worshipped the 2 statues, chanting some strange scriptures. In these creatures' eyes, the reason why the world-ending calamity disappeared was because the Domain Lord and Supreme Deity statue had appeared, protecting them and helping them neutralize the calamity. After this incident, their worship of the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Master and the Paragon statue would become even more pious and unswerving. The burial of heaven could clearly sense the fanatical, invisible divine power of faith being released from the bodies of the billions of believers. It was like a trickling river that converged into a river and poured into the 2 statues. For a time, the Domain Lords and Supreme God statues in countless cities became dazzling with golden light. Those who didn't know better might actually think that the Domain Lord and Supreme Deity statue had appeared and released their divine light. The burial of heaven looked on coldly and disdainfully. It only had 2 words to evaluate the outsiders. Ignorant. That was the reaction of the outsiders on Thousand Blue Planet. The burial of heaven couldn't be bothered to look at them and quickly left. Next, it traveled through the void and checked on a few other stars. The planets behind the Thousand Blue Planet were also damaged to varying degrees. Many holes had been punched through the surface of those stars by the meteors and star fragments. Hundreds of millions of people had died on each planet. Many mountains, rivers, and cities had been destroyed. However, compared to Thousand Blue Planet, the casualties on those planets were even smaller. The non-humankind beings on these planets had the same reaction. Seeing that the void had returned to normal and the meteor shower had disappeared, everyone danced, shouted, and danced in excitement. At the same time, many believers of the Domain Lord and Supreme Deity statue madly worshipped the 2 statues to express their gratitude. The Domain Lord and Supreme Deity statue had protected them and helped them resolve the apocalypse. It made them even more loyal and devout. For half a month, Buried Heaven checked the 7 stars and found that the situation was more or less the same. It was a bit tired and couldn't be bothered to check on the other 7 planets. It used to be cold and indifferent to those ignorant non-humankind creatures. But now not only did it feel contempt, it even felt a bit disgusted. Felt bad for Ji Tianxing. If it could turn back time, it would definitely try its best to persuade Ji Tianxing not to save those ignorant people. After all, those people were too ignorant. Also, Ji Tianxing didn't receive the Heavenly Tao's reward. Half a month had passed in the outside world. Ji Tianxing had been in seclusion in the distorted space-time for 2 years to heal his injuries. His injuries hadn't healed yet, but he had recovered 80% of his strength and was fine. The burial of heaven woke him up with a telepathic message and reported the situation to him. You asked me to check the situation of each planet. I've already checked 7 planets. The situation of each planet is similar. There are only a few casualties. Most people are excited and happy. After reporting the situation of each world, the burial of heaven said, if your injuries are not serious, I suggest you come to the void to take a look. Although the Heavenly Tao didn't reward you, the star cores and star debris in the void are also a huge fortune. Ji Tianxing quickly ended his seclusion to heal his injuries and replied with a smile. I've thought about this problem before. It's just that I was weak at that time and it wasn't suitable for me to refine those things. Now that my injuries are not serious, let's search for the spoils of war first. With that, he flew out of the sword world and into the void. Standing in the void, he looked around and saw that in the void within a radius of 1 billion miles, apart from the 14 planets, there were densely packed star cores and star debris. There were at least a few million pieces of star cores and star debris of different sizes floating quietly in the void, flickering with various colors of light. 80% of those star cores and star debris were meteorites that he had destroyed. The other 20% were formed after meteorites crashed into other abandoned planets. Although only half of the millions of star debris were precious resources and treasures, the other half were not very valuable. But this was already an immeasurable amount of wealth. Ji Tianqing smiled and said excitedly, "There are so many star cores and star debris. If I were to refine them one by one, I'm afraid I'll be delayed here for a few hundred years. Forget it, I'll put these things away first and slowly refine them in the future." Therefore he sped through the void and constantly used his capturing ability to grab star cores and star debris one after another and put them into his spatial ring. The size of each star core and star debris was different. The large ones were 30 to 40,000 miles in diameter, while the small ones were only a few hundred miles in diameter. He ignored those that contained less star power, ores and metals and only picked the more valuable ones. Chapter 3985. After an entire month, Ji Tianqing finally finished cleaning up the battlefield. He had collected nearly 2 million precious star cores, crystals and debris of the stars. His space ring had long been refined to a superior grade king level. The internal space of the ring was a few million miles wide. He didn't know how many resources and treasures it could hold. Even so, his space ring was still filled to the brim. The other 400,000 plus star cores and debris of the stars were stored in the internal space of the primordial chaos bell. After plundering the spoils of war, the void within a few hundred million miles was obviously much thinner. Although there were still more than 2 million debris floating in the void. But with the passage of time, perhaps in a few decades, those fragments would drift away. Of course, if the godly kings of the other races on the 14 stars entered the void to pick up treasures, they would also be able to obtain a large number of debris. However, those debris of the stars were slightly less valuable. Ji Tianqing didn't care about them. Next, Ji Tianqing returned to the sword world and began to distribute the star cores, crystals and debris. The burial of Heaven's sword continued its journey in the void, heading deep into the heavenly sun star zone. Its target was the blazing sun star, the star where the heavenly sun star zone ruler was. In the distorted spacetime, Ji Tianqing sat cross-legged under the bloody flame sacred tree and began to count the spoils of war. There were nearly 2 million pieces of debris of the stars, all of which had different grades and values. Ji Tianqing pondered. If he were to devour and refine these debris of the stars, it would take him thousands of years to finish refining them. Even with Yunyao, Jiku and the others, it would still take him thousands of years. After thinking about it, he decided to choose a portion of the less valuable and less precious debris of the stars to cultivate the 5-element world and replenish the power of the heaven-mending pearl. After all, he had absorbed the power of the 5-element world and the heaven-mending pearl when he was fighting against the meteorites. 3 days later, Ji Tianqing selected 1.5 million pieces of debris of the stars and gave them to the heaven-mending pearl to devour. After the heaven-mending pearl devoured the debris of the stars, they would become pure star power and divine power. Half of it would be used to strengthen the heaven-mending pearl, and the other half would be transferred to the 5-element world. The internal space of the heaven-mending pearl was very large and could accommodate the entire 5 elements world. Ji Tianqing stuffed the 1.5 million pieces of the debris of the stars into the heaven-mending orb and let it slowly devour them. Although it devoured the debris of the stars at an extremely fast speed, it was still able to devour the debris of the stars. However, Ji Tianqing estimated that it would take at least 100 years to digest all the debris of the stars. As a result, the heaven-mending pearl once again lit up with a dense white light. It became dazzling and its strength was also rapidly recovering. The 5 elements world was once again engulfed in a divine power storm. The entire world began to rapidly expand and strengthen. Batch after batch of living beings grew up and batch after batch of geniuses and gods were born. As the elemental world rapidly grew and became stronger, Ji Tianqing sensed that his strength was also steadily increasing. He didn't stay idle either. He focused on using the devouring divine ability to refine those precious star cores and star crystals. The star core and star crystal were the origin of a star. They were also the condensed essence of a star. Not only did they contain the purest star power, but they also contained divine power of various attributes, as well as high-quality metals and ores. Ji Tianxing refined those star cores and crystals. Not only did his strength increase exponentially, but he also condensed more divine Tao laws. All in all, the value and effect of star cores and star crystals far exceeded that of high-grade king-grade divine pills. Ji Tianxing's harvest this time could no longer be measured by the number of divine stones. Even trillions of divine stones couldn't be exchanged for 2 million pieces of the debris of the stars. This could be considered to be the greatest fortune he had ever obtained in his life. 3 years later, Ji Tianxing's injuries were completely healed. He was in peak condition and his strength was close to the peak of the 9th Heaven God King realm. At this moment he wasn't far from the peak of the God King realm. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others had been cultivating in seclusion for a few years. They had also digested the power of merit. Everyone's strength, talent, and aptitude had obviously improved. This was especially so for Ji Wushuang, Qianyu, Heilong, and Bailong. They had all increased by a level, reaching the 2nd and 3rd Heaven God King realm. Everyone came out of seclusion and woke up. At this time, Ji Tianxing gathered everyone and gave each of them 10 pieces of star crystals. These are the meteorites that we intercepted previously. They are all star fragments and crystals, and they contain extremely pure and powerful energy. Refine these star crystals and you will definitely increase your strength greatly. Ji Tianxing explained the origin and effects of the star crystals to everyone. They were very happy and excited. The meteorites that we destroyed previously are now hundreds of thousands of pieces. Doesn't this mean that there are hundreds of thousands of star crystals? What rich divine power of the stars! This is even more powerful than 10 king-grade divine pills. Just this one stellar crystal is worth tens of billions of cultivation resources. What a huge star crystal! It's actually tens of thousands of miles long and wide. It's like a huge mountain range. Oh my God! 10 pieces of star crystals. When will I be able to refine all of them? Probably a few hundred years. None of them were like Ji Tianxing, who had mastered the engulfing divine power and could quickly refine the star crystals. They could only slowly absorb the power of the star crystals, and their speed was dozens of times slower than Ji Tianxing's. Even so, they were still very happy that they had obtained the star crystals. Ji Tianxing encouraged everyone for a while before dispersing to cultivate in seclusion. He continued to refine the star crystals and worked hard to increase his strength to become a peak god king. Time flew by. Unknowingly, the sword of burial of heaven had been flying for 3 months in the Tianyang star zone. It passed through tens of billions of miles of space and entered the center of the Tianyang star zone. It was about to reach the Liang star. At this time, Ji Tianxing and the others had been cultivating in the distorted spacetime for 12 years. Unfortunately, he had not broken through to the peak God King realm even after refining hundreds of star crystals. However, he was only a step away from the peak God King realm. As for the extent of his strength, it was impossible to estimate at this point. But one thing was certain. Other than the 5 god emperors of the divine world, no one was a match for him. In the dark and cold space in front of the sword of burial of heaven, a dazzling golden star appeared. It was a Big Dipper star with a diameter of a few billion miles. It was as bright and dazzling as the sun. Compared to the hundreds of stars around it, it was a giant with a powerful aura. This was the center of the Tianyang star zone, the Liang star where the Zone Lord lived. The sword of burial of heaven was still a few billion miles away from the Liang star and would arrive in 3 or 4 days. But then, the sword of burial of heaven suddenly woke Ji Tianxing up. There are more than 20 divine warships in front of us heading towards the Liang star. Judging from their route, they seem to be coming from the same stars as us. Ji Tianxing, who had just finished his seclusion, frowned when he heard the sword of burial of heaven's message. Are you saying that the 20 godly warships are the star lords and deity kings who fled in advance when the 14 planets were hit by the meteoroids? Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 3986. Ji Tianxing didn't expect to run into the star lords who had abandoned their planets and fled here. They should have escaped from the 14 planets almost a month in advance. They should have entered the Liang star by now. No one knew if the divine warships were too slow, or if something had happened along the way to delay them. Xianxia didn't expect to run into the Star Lords outside the Liang Star. How about, we kill them all before they enter the Liang Star? Burial of Heaven asked Xianxia telepathically while speeding up to catch up with the divine warships. Burial of Heaven despised the Star Lords who abandoned their people and fled on their own. He wanted to kill them. However, Xianxia stopped him from doing so. He advised, we're too close to the Liang Star. If we destroy the divine warships and kill the Star Lords, the Liang Star will be alerted. Let's follow them into the Liang Star and act accordingly. Burial of Heaven understood that Xianxia wasn't worried that the experts of the Liang Star would be alerted and join forces to attack him. He was worried that the experts of the Liang Star and the domain lord of the heavenly sun star would notice something was wrong and flee in advance. Those god kings of foreign races had no moral integrity. They would run faster than anyone else once they noticed something was wrong. They didn't have any psychological burden at all. Therefore, Burial of Heaven said calmly, if that's the case, we'll do as you say. A few hours later, Burial of Heaven caught up with the divine warships. It hid its tracks and aura as if it had become one with the dark void. It was very well hidden. The godly king experts on the 20+ divine ships had been traveling in the void for 4 months. They had let down their guard long ago. Moreover, they were about to enter the Liang Star. There shouldn't be any accidents or dangers. Therefore, no one noticed that a pitch-black divine sword was silently following the fleet. Not long after, the fleet passed through the spatial barrier and entered the Liang Star. Burial of Heaven followed closely behind. It didn't expose itself or encounter any obstacles. The boundless Liang Star had more than 10 vast continents, as well as mountains, rivers, and sceneries with distinct seasons. There were tens of billions of living beings living on each continent. The Liang Star should be the most prosperous and populous star in the entire domain of Heavenly Sunday. The fleet of more than 20 divine warships had clearly received orders from the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord. Without any hesitation, they headed straight for the blazing Sun continent in the north. Xianxia knew that the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord's cave dwelling was located in the depths of the continent, in a secret realm with an excellent environment. Xianxia was quite clear about the situation in the secret realm. After all, Divine King Everwind had been there many times. Each time he would stay for half a month. After entering the blazing sun star, the fleet slowed down a lot. Obviously, they were too tired to travel. Now they were completely relaxed. After 7 days, the fleet finally arrived at the heavenly Yang secret realm of the blazing sun continent. The entrance to the mystic realm was located in a sea of white clouds above a snowy plain. The entrance was a huge space array that formed a light gate that was hundreds of meters tall. There were close to 100 guards standing guard on both sides of the door of light. The 2 guard commanders were both mid-level divine kings. These guards were all wearing shiny silver armor, holding halberds in their hands and carrying divine swords at their waists. They looked majestic. The fleet of more than a dozen Star Lords arrived at the entrance of the mystic realm and stopped to be interrogated. The Star Lords didn't need to show themselves. Their assistants and trusted aides naturally came forward to negotiate with the guard commanders. They took out their identity tokens to indicate their identities and intentions. After a short discussion, the fleet was allowed to enter. However, the mystic realm was the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord's cave dwelling. The fleet was not allowed to enter. The 14 Star Lords had to show themselves. They put away more than 20 divine warships and led more than 20 followers and trusted aides into the Heavenly Yang secret realm. Xianxia took this opportunity to quietly appear and put away the Burial of Heaven. Using the same trick, he turned into a speck of dust and attached himself to the armor of a foreign race's divine king. He then followed the crowd into the mystic realm. The mystic realm had beautiful mountains and rivers and was filled with divine power. A bright golden star hung in the blue sky. The Star Lords led their trusted aides and followers into the depths of the mystic realm. They didn't look like stray dogs that had lost their homes. After flying for 300,000 miles, a group of magnificent palaces appeared at the peak of a mountain in front of them. Many foreign race experts and guards could be seen in the palaces, which were obviously designed in a foreign race's style. The 14 Star Lords flew to the peak of the mountain and landed outside the majestic Heavenly Sun Divine Palace. They explained their intentions to the guards guarding the palace. In fact, the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord had already received news that they would be coming today. When he heard the guard's message, the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord immediately ordered for the Star Lords to meet him. The 14 Star Lords gave their followers and trusted aides a few instructions. It was probably because these followers and trusted aides were afraid that they would lose their composure and say the wrong thing since it was their first time meeting the Domain Lord. Everyone entered the magnificent palace one after another. They lined up in 2 rows and bowed to the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord, who was sitting on the main throne. The Heavenly Sun Domain Lord was a colorful foreign race expert with a tiger's head and an eagle's body. He exuded the aura of a peak god king. The 14 Star Lords and many god kings were very respectful to the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord. Only Zhi Tianxing knew that the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord was just for show. However, he didn't show himself. He remained invisible and hid in a corner of the palace, waiting to see what would happen. After the Star Lords bowed, the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord nodded slightly and motioned for them to rise. Then he laughed heartily and exchanged pleasantries with the Star Lords. Star Lords, you have traveled a long way and spent 4 months to reach the Liang Star. Must have been very tiring. I received the news in advance and ordered people to arrange accommodations for you. After the meeting is over, I will send people to take you to rest. The Star Lords also put on smiles and pretentiously thanked him. After chatting for a while, the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord went straight to the point. The 14 planets led by the 1,000 Blue Planet encountered a rare meteor shower. I deeply sympathize with you. I wonder, did the Star Lords transfer their resources and wealth when they left? You shouldn't have left out the Divine King experts of the various stars. Did you bring them all away? Zhi Tianxing didn't expect that the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord wouldn't even bother to put on a show. He didn't ask about the casualties of the 14 planets, nor did he try to comfort them. Instead, he asked these questions directly. The 14 Star Lords were used to it and didn't find it strange. The 1,000 Blue Planet Lord took the lead to report the situation, and the other Star Lords followed suit. Sir, only 3 God Kings were left from the 1,000 Blue Planet. A total of 15 God Kings escaped. I have brought 80% of the cultivation resources and wealth I collected over the years. Sir, only 3 of the 12 God Kings from the Nier-Mo planet were left. 70% of the wealth and resources were transferred. Sir, 13 God Kings from the vast star were left. 70% of the resources were transferred. Wonderful book house. Chapter 3987. The Heavenly Sun Domain Lord nodded with a satisfied smile as he listened to the Star Lords' reports. However, a few Star Lords had fled in a hurry. They had only taken a few God Kings with them and transferred a small portion of the wealth and resources. The Heavenly Sun Domain Lord's smile faded when he heard their reports. He frowned and looked displeased. The Star Lords who had satisfied the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord were all calm and collected. The Star Lords who had made the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord frown and displeased were uneasy. Fortunately, the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord didn't make things difficult for them after hearing their reports. He said calmly, apart from a few Star Lords who were a little flustered, the rest of the Star Lords responded calmly. I'm very pleased. After the meeting, please pay the tribute according to the rules. Don't delay Lord Supreme's orders. The 14 Star Lords all bowed and said that they had received the order. The Heavenly Sun Domain Lord then asked, I received your message earlier. I only knew that a meteor shower had attacked your planet, but I didn't know the details. Which Star Lord can tell me in detail what happened and what the outcome was? The 14 Star Lords frowned and looked awful after hearing that. Well, the Heavenly Sun Region Lord guessed the reason when he saw everyone cowering and hesitating. He frowned and asked, could it be that you're running away before the meteor shower has even arrived? Did no one know the process or the outcome? The dozen or so Star Lords quickly lowered their heads in tacit agreement. Seeing the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord's displeasure, 1,000 Blue Star Lord quickly stepped forward and explained, My lord, the meteor shower was unprecedentedly large. I've never seen anything like it before. 1,000 Blue Star Lord bore the brunt of it, so I know a little better than you. The meteor shower was hundreds of millions of miles long and 200 million miles wide. We were weak, so we could only run away as fast as we could. No one dared to hesitate or stay. If we couldn't escape the meteor shower's range, we would all be smashed to pieces. The Heavenly Sun Domain Lord's expression eased a lot. He nodded and asked, "So it's been 4 months and you don't know the outcome?" The 14 Star Lords shook their heads. The 1,000 Blue Planet Master smiled bitterly and said, "Sir Region Master, there is no need to doubt the results. Such a terrifying meteor shower would definitely blast the 14 stars into smithereens and collapse on the spot." The Heavenly Sun Domain Lord frowned and sighed. Sigh. Why would we encounter such a calamity for no reason? With 14 stars destroyed, he would not be able to collect cultivation resources in the future. Every 50 years, the amount of tribute that I have to hand over has decreased by a lot. I hope that Lord Supreme Martial Artist won't get angry. The 14 Star Lords were lost for words and remained silent. Some of the anxious Star Lords wanted to ask the Heavenly Sun Region Lord how he was going to settle them down. Were they going to be sent to other planets to continue being Star Lords? Or should he leave them on the blazing sun star to serve under the Domain Master? However, the 1,000 Blue Planet Lord knew that it wasn't the time to talk about that. She hinted at the other Star Lords to stop them. Thus, the meeting ended. The Heavenly Sun Protector waved his hand and motioned for everyone to leave. He then reminded the Star Lords to pay the tribute to the Chief Steward immediately. The Star Lords and the Divine Kings hurriedly bowed and left the conference hall. Next, the 14 Star Lords went to the Chief Steward and handed over trillions of cultivation resources to each planet. The Heavenly Sun Protector returned to his study and continued to deal with government affairs. At the same time, he also sent messages to several Star Lords and urged them to complete their tasks as soon as possible. Xianxia secretly followed the Heavenly Sun Protector and snuck into his study. After observing for a while, he realized that the Heavenly Sun Protector had already made preparations. It turned out that the Heavenly Sun Protector had ordered the 6 Star Lords to investigate the situation of the 14 stars as early as 10 days ago. The planets that the 6 Star Lords occupied weren't far away from the 14 stars. Obviously, it would save them the most time and effort to investigate the situation. The Heavenly Sun Protector had ordered this because he wanted to know the consequences of the meteor shower and whether the 14 stars still existed. However, the 6 Star Lords who had been ordered to investigate the situation had already sped up and couldn't report back for the time being. The Heavenly Sun Protector pondered that he had to know whether the 14 stars were still there before he could decide how to settle the 14 Star Lords. Therefore, he gave strict orders to the 6 Star Lords who were investigating the situation. No matter what, he had to know the results by tomorrow. A boring and dull day passed. The Heavenly Sun Protector was very busy. He had been dealing with government affairs in his study and hadn't left at all. Xianxia wasn't in a hurry to deal with the Heavenly Sun Protector. Since he was bored in the study, he wandered around the Divine Palace. The 14 Star Lords who had fled from the disaster went to their residences to rest after handing in their tributes with their confidants and attendants. On the surface they said they were resting, but in fact they were a little nervous. They gathered together to discuss how the Heavenly Sun Protector would settle them down. Xianxia eavesdropped for a while and understood their true thoughts. 12 Star Lords didn't want to stay on the Liang planet. They all wanted the Heavenly Sun Protector to send them to other planets. Only 2 Star Lords were willing to stay on the Liang planet and work for the Heavenly Sun Protector. Although they would have more power and a higher status if they stayed under the Heavenly Sun Protector's command. However, this also came with greater risks. In contrast, most Star Lords were more willing to rule a planet and be an unrestrained local overlord. Finally, the next night arrived. The 6 Star Lords who had been ordered to investigate the situation finally sent back a message to the Heavenly Sun Protector. After reading the reports, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord's spirits were lifted and he breathed a sigh of relief. The results of the 6 Star Lords' reports were beyond his expectations and puzzled him. However, he was obviously more happy than suspicious. He didn't hesitate to issue an order to summon the 14 Star Lords to the conference hall for a discussion. After receiving the order, the 14 Star Lords rushed to the conference hall, full of anticipation, without even bringing their attendants or confidants. They all thought that the Heavenly Sun Protector had already thought about how to settle them down. Xianxia had been hiding and watching coldly from the side. Of course, he followed them when he saw them going to the conference hall. Soon, everyone was gathered in the conference hall. After the 2 sides greeted each other, the Heavenly Sun Protector went straight to the point. "Dear Star Lords, I've called everyone here in the middle of the night because I have great news to announce. I've sent a few envoys to personally investigate the situation of the 14 planets. The results were beyond my expectations as well as yours. That massive meteor shower had miraculously collapsed and disintegrated. The 14 stars had all suffered varying degrees of damage, but miraculously, they were all preserved and not destroyed. Therefore, you haven't lost your home and can return tomorrow. Chapter 3988. The sudden good news silenced the hall. The 14 Star Lords were stunned, and their eyes widened in astonishment. They were still trying to figure out how the heavenly sun ruler would settle them down. Who would have thought that their planet would survive and not be destroyed? This was simply a huge surprise, too unexpected. Everyone was stunned for a few breaths before they came back to their senses. Then they burst into cheers and exclamations. Oh my God! Is this true? It's unbelievable. How could that devastating meteor shower disintegrate for no reason? Our planet wasn't destroyed? How is that possible? Great. Our planet is still there and so are our people and territory. The 14 Star Lords whispered to each other excitedly. Their hanging hearts could finally be put down. They didn't have to think about how the heavenly sun ruler would settle them down, nor did they have to worry about their future. However, as everyone calmed down, the same doubts filled the minds of every Star Lord. My lord, this can't be fake, can it? Did the emissaries see it with their own eyes? Yes, my lord, that meteor shower was so huge. How could it collapse for no reason? When we fled, the meteor shower was only a few 100 million miles away from our planet. It would have hit us in 4 to 6 hours. How could it collapse for no reason? Even if there were experts protecting our planet, who in this world could have withstood such a terrifying catastrophe? Everyone looked at the heavenly sun ruler with burning eyes, waiting for his answer. Of course, the heavenly sun ruler didn't know what was going on, but he had already thought of an excuse. In the face of everyone's doubts, he pointed to the sky above his head with a mysterious smile and said confidently, "Don't forget that although I'm the domain lord of the Tianyang star region, I'm actually working for Lord Supremacy. The mysterious Lord Supremacy has always protected the entire heavenly sun star region. I've never seen Lord Supremacy's true appearance, but his strength and means are no different from the heavens. So, you should now know who withstood the catastrophe and protected our trillions of people, right?" Hearing that, the 14 Star Lords were stunned for a moment. Then they were all shocked and found it hard to believe. Was it Lord Supreme, who neutralized the meteor shower and protected our star? Unbelievable. Just what realm is Lord Supreme at to have such terrifying strength and divine abilities? If it was really done by Lord Supreme, then he can really be compared to the heavens. Yes. In the face of that meteor shower, other than the heavens, no one can save our planet and its people. In that case, could it be that the mysterious Lord Supreme is the heavens? The heavenly sun protector put on a satisfied smile as he watched the Star Lords discussing with shock and admiration. However, when he heard that everyone's discussion was a little off topic, he hurriedly reminded them, "Everyone, Lord Supreme Martial Artist isn't God, but he's comparable to God. You have to understand. When you return to your respective planets, you must also explain this to your people. It was because of their devout faith in Lord Jizun that Lord Jizun acted to resolve the crisis and save everyone. Don't talk about going to heaven. What's the use of going to heaven? Lord Supreme Martial Artist is our sky." The 14 Star Lords hurriedly nodded to show that they understood. This way they would know how to explain to their people when they returned to their respective planets. In fact, they would even spare no effort to flatter Lord Utmost Exalted and exaggerate Lord Utmost Exalted's achievements to the heavens. After a long while, the noisy meeting hall finally quieted down. The heavenly sun protector looked at everyone and ordered, "All right, today's meeting is over. Star-Lords, go back and rest. You will set off early tomorrow morning. Remember, when you return to your respective planets, you must quell the chaos as soon as possible and win the hearts of the people. In the next 50 years, you will still have to submit enough tributes according to the rules." The 14 Star Lords beamed with joy and nodded in agreement. Then they bid farewell and left. After everyone left, the heavenly sun protector sneered and turned to leave the meeting hall. Ji Tianxing also left the hall and continued to stroll around the palace while remaining invisible. He wasn't strolling around. Instead, he was exploring the layout of the palace, looking for the key array and the location of the treasury. Before coming to the Liang star, he only wanted to kill the heavenly sun protector and cut off the 9 suns god emperor's wings. He also wanted to find out about his master. However, after seeing the ugly state of the heavenly sun protector and the other star lords in the past 2 days, he wanted to kill them. At this point, it wasn't as simple as killing the heavenly sun protector. The next morning, the 14 star lords left the divine palace with their trusted subordinates and their entourage in delight. Ji Tianxing quietly followed them out of the heavenly sun secret realm. Then the 14 star lords and their trusted aides and followers all took out their divine warships. 28 divine warships flew high into the sky and soon entered the void outside the realm. These people were eager to return home, so the fleet flew a little faster than when they had come. Ji Tianxing followed behind the fleet, neither arrogant nor impatient. It wasn't until 2 days later, when the fleet had flown 400 million miles away, that he made his move. This distance wasn't far from the Liang star. However, there were no godly kings following them along the way. Even if Ji Tianxing destroyed the entire fleet, he wouldn't be discovered. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing suddenly accelerated, flew above the fleet and took out the primordial chaos bell. Seal! He shouted angrily and injected a vast amount of divine power into the divine bell. Immediately, the primordial chaos bell expanded to a radius of 50,000 miles and descended from the sky to suppress the entire fleet. The star lords and godly kings in the various divine warships were still immersed in excitement and joy. They weren't prepared for a sudden attack at all. By the time they realized that something was wrong, it was already too late. The entire fleet and the 28 divine warships were enveloped by the primordial chaos bell. The divine warships were surrounded by absolute darkness. Everyone was terrified and anxious. The 14 star lords roared angrily and sent their trusted aides and guards to check the situation outside the divine warships. At that moment, Ji Tianxing turned into a giant golden god that was 10,000 feet tall. He held the sword of burial of heaven and began to kill. Swoosh! He held the 800-foot sword of burial of heaven expressionlessly and slashed with all his might. With a loud boom, an upper-grade king-grade divine warship was split in half on the spot. Countless cultivation resources poured out and sprinkled in the void. There were also a few dozen divine monarch realm guards and a few divine king realm experts mixed in. Ji Tianxing ignored the panicked guards and godly kings and slashed at the other divine warships. Boom! Bang bang! Boom! With a series of loud bangs, the divine warships were split in half one after another and countless pieces splashed everywhere. Chapter 3989. The 28 divine warships could travel freely in the void and protect the safety of tens of thousands of people. In fact, when they formed a fleet, they were like a fortress. But under Ji Tianxing's sword, these divine warships were incomparably frail like paper paste. In less than 100 breaths of time, Ji Tianxing had destroyed all 28 divine warships. The wreckage of the divine warships and scattered cultivation resources floated in the void. More than 140 divine king realm experts and thousands of divine monarch realm experts were scattered in the void. Although they had the advantage in numbers, they were suddenly attacked and lost the protection of the divine warships. They all fled in panic. Of course, they split into 14 teams and fled in different directions. But unfortunately, the primordial chaos bell had sealed off the area within a radius of 50,000 miles. These foreign race experts and Ji Tianxing were all inside the primordial chaos bell. Without Ji Tianxing's permission and breaking through the primordial chaos bell's defenses, they would definitely not be able to escape. When the 14 teams were blocked by the primordial chaos bell and saw that they could not escape, they could only stop and fight. The divine lord guards were panicking, but the 14 star lords were still calm and collected. Even though they did not know who had attacked them. But when they saw that there was only one attacker, they immediately relaxed a lot. Everyone, don't panic. There's only one person blocking our fleet. Although that guy is a high-level godly king and is very strong, we have more than 1,000 people. That's right. The elite experts of our 14 stars are all here. Even if it's a peak godly king, we can easily kill him. Everyone, don't run anymore. Let's work together to kill him and then think of a way to leave. Quickly send a message and inform the territorial lord. Ask him to send reinforcements. More than a dozen star lords shouted and gave advice to stabilize the morale of the troops. Soon the 14 teams closed in on the center from all directions. Everyone's eyes and attention were focused on Ji Tianxing. Everyone held swords, sabers and all kinds of divine weapons looking murderous. More than 1,000 godly lords and godly kings against a peak godly king expert. In anyone's eyes, the result was obvious. Therefore the foreign race experts on the 14 planets were not afraid at all. They were only worried that the combined attack of more than 1,000 people would turn the other party into ashes. They were simply unable to vent their anger and killing intent. It looked as if a fight was about to break out due to the disparity in numbers. But at this time, Ji Tianxing took out the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and opened a spatial passage. Yun Yao, Ji Ku Chao Qingyu, and the others who had been cultivating in seclusion in the godly pagoda left the godly pagoda and appeared in the void. Swoosh. Swoosh. Following the flashes of white light, over a dozen divine king powerhouses appeared beside Ji Tianxing. They were always cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime. It was too dry and boring. It was not easy to come across such an opportunity for actual combat. Of course, no one was willing to miss it. Everyone stood in a circle facing the 1,000 or so alien experts from all directions. Not only were they not worried or afraid, but they were also eager to fight. That scene made the 14 Star Lords frown. They knew that the situation was not good. If they were only besieging a peak divine king, they would have an absolute advantage in terms of numbers, so it would be a piece of cake. However, besieging a dozen divine kings, even though the Star Lords were confident that they would win, they also knew that they would suffer heavy casualties. For a moment, the Star Lords and the divine kings of the alien races became solemn. They were even hesitating whether they should stall for time and wait for the Heavenly Sun Region Lord to send reinforcements. However, the attendants and guards who were responsible for sending messages said that they couldn't send any jade slips. They couldn't contact the Heavenly Sun Region Lord at all. The 14 Star Lords became even more anxious and worried. While they were hesitating, Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao and the others attacked first. Kill. Let's go. You have to protect yourselves when you're fighting the enemy. Everyone shouted and waved their divine weapons, performing divine powers and ultimate skills to attack the divine lords and divine kings of the alien races. It was as if they weren't facing ferocious alien overlords, but a bunch of monsters with experience. The 14 Star Lords and the divine kings of the alien races were stunned. They couldn't help but roar and curse. Damn those B** stars. How dare they attack before we even do anything? Are those alien races crazy? They're looking down on us and humiliating us. I feel like we're not the ones besieging them, they're the ones besieging us. What are you waiting for? Fight with all your might and kill them all. As the Star Lords gave their orders, the 1,000 or so divine lords and divine kings of the alien races also roared and charged. A fierce battle broke out. Yun Yao and Ji Ku took Ji Wushuang and attacked the divine kings and divine lords of the alien races in the east. They were also paying attention to Ji Wushuang's situation while fighting bravely. This battle was to train Ji Wushuang, increase her actual combat experience and stabilize her foundation of the divine path. Naturally, they couldn't let her encounter any real danger or suffer any fatal injuries. Bai Feng attacked the divine lords of the alien races in the west alone, performing all kinds of divine powers and ultimate skills. Chao Qingyu, Yang and Lan attacked the divine lords of the alien races in the south. Lin Shui, Divine King Blood Illusion, Qian Yu and Black Dragon worked together to kill the divine lords of the alien races in the north. As for Ji Tianxing, he was above everyone else and controlled the situation. He performed all kinds of divine powers with his left hand and slashed with his sword with his right hand, killing the divine lords of the alien races quickly. At the same time, he used his divine sense to monitor the situation and protect everyone. Once someone was in danger of losing their life, but was unable to dodge or resist, he would make a timely move to save them. Just like that, everyone fought and killed without mishap. They benefited a lot from the battle. In just an hour, more than half of the 14 Star Lords had been killed by Ji Tianxing. Only 5 were still holding on bitterly. He also killed more than 60 Divine King Realm Divine Lords of the alien races. As for the Divine Lord Guards, he didn't deliberately kill them. However, the divine powers and ultimate skills he used were too powerful and he killed more than 300 Divine Lords in an instant. As for Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Bai Feng and the others, their performance was also very eye-catching. They killed more than 40 Divine Kings of the alien races and more than 500 Divine Lord Guards. As a result, there were only 100 Divine Lord Guards, more than 30 Divine Kings of the alien races, and 5 Star Lords left on the battlefield. The surviving Divine Lords of the alien races were all injured and covered in blood. They were in a sorry state. Even Yun Yao, Jiku and the others were injured, but it wasn't a big deal. At this point the outcome was already decided. The 5 Star Lords, the Divine Kings and the Divine Lords were all terrified. Chapter 3990. Although the 5 Star Lords and the foreign races still had the advantage of numbers, they were still surrounded by a group of people. However, when they gathered together, they were surrounded by Ji Tianxing and the others. Many non-humankind warriors huddled together, guarding against Ji Tianxing and the others. They were filled with fear and vigilance. The 5 Star Lords leading them were too afraid of death and wanted to surrender to Ji Tianxing. They didn't know Ji Tianxing's identity and background, but they were willing to be Ji Tianxing's captives and work for him in order to survive. Even the stars they controlled had to be given to Ji Tianxing with both hands. But Ji Tianxing wasn't interested in that, and he didn't believe in the loyalty of the foreign race's divine kings. Even if he was willing to accept captives and train a group of divine kings as his subordinates, he wouldn't choose these foreign races' divine kings. So Ji Tianxing decisively refused the 5 Star Lords' surrender and continued to fight. The 5 Star Lords and the Divine Kings and Divine Lords were completely desperate. They knew they couldn't survive, so they fought back desperately. But this was just a useless struggle. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao and the others used another 15 minutes to kill all the remaining foreign races experts. After the battle, the space within 50,000 miles became calm again. More than 1,000 foreign races experts had been killed, and Ji Tianxing only collected the divine fragments of 100 divine kings. As for the wreckage of the divine warships floating in the air and the cultivation resources and other resources, Yun Yao, Jiku and the others cleaned them up. Soon they cleaned up the battlefield. Yun Yao, Jiku and the others counted the resources they found in the 28 divine warships. The total value was more than 3 trillion. Ji Tianxing of course took them all. He picked out the cultivation resources and treasures at the divine king level and left them for everyone to cultivate with. He stuffed all the resources below the divine king level into the heaven-mending orb to cultivate the 5 elements world. What made him feel a little awkward was that Qian Yu and the Black Dragon had also dragged the wreckage of the 28 divine warships back. Ji Tianxing did not want the remains of the divine battleship. But Qian Yu said with conviction that the wreckage of the divine warships had to be disposed of, otherwise, there would be traces left behind. This place was too close to Liang's star. It wouldn't be long before the Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler noticed the abnormality and found out the truth. Moreover, the divine warship was built with countless precious materials. He could not afford to waste them. Ji Tianxing felt that it made sense, so he stuffed the wreckage of the 28 divine warships into the heaven-mending pearl as well. Without a doubt, the heaven-mending bead was too busy. The hundreds of thousands of pieces of the debris of the stars that Ji Tianxing had stuffed in previously would take more than 100 years to refine. The 3 trillion cultivation resources and the wreckage of the 28 divine warships would take an unknown number of years to obtain. After cleaning up the battlefield and dealing with the spoils of war, Ji Tianxing allowed everyone to return to the divine tower to cultivate and heal their wounds. Then he steered the sword of burial of heaven back to the blazing sun. He had dealt with the Star Lords of the 14 stars. Next he would deal with the Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler. The Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler was in a good mood. When the 14 Star Lords had come to join him, he had been in a bit of a dilemma. He didn't know what to do with them. Every star in the Heavenly Sun Domain already had a Star Lord. He couldn't free up the positions of the 14 Star Lords to settle them down. Even if he kept the 14 Star Lords by his side, his subordinates were already full and there weren't that many positions. Fortunately, the 14 stars hadn't been destroyed, and the 14 Star Lords could still return to their original positions. Moreover, he had thought of an explanation for everyone, which would also enhance Lord Supremacy's image and prestige. This was definitely the best of both worlds. He had already thought about it. When he met Lord Supremacy soon, he would definitely report this matter. If he could gain Lord Supremacy's favor, he would be able to reap great benefits. He had never forgotten that it was Lord Supremacy's guidance that allowed him to become a peak divine king. Without Lord Supremacy's guidance, he wouldn't have the power and status he had today. Therefore he was deeply grateful to Lord Supremacy and was absolutely loyal to him. He would work hard to become Lord Supremacy's most trusted aide. That way he would be able to leave the Heavenly Sun domain and follow Lord Supremacy. He would come into contact with more secrets and gain more power. In the past, when Divine King Chongfeng was still alive, he didn't even dare to think about this problem. This was because he knew that Divine King Chongfeng was Lord Supremacy's emissary and a trusted aide who was highly regarded. However, Divine King Chongfeng had mysteriously disappeared a few decades ago, and there was still no news of him. The Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler had checked Divine King Chongfeng's spirit jade tablet and found that it had shattered. Therefore he was certain that Divine King Chongfeng had died long ago. Lord Supremacy also knew about this and sent him a message a few years ago, ordering him to personally escort the cultivation resources to the depths of the void. After all, Lord Supremacy had yet to find a replacement after Divine King Chongfeng's death. When the Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler received the order, he knew that his chance had come. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. After the 14 Star Lords left the Liang Star, the Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler ordered his trusted generals to begin gathering the cultivation resources. The endless cultivation resources were the tributes that hundreds of planets had submitted over the past few decades. Now 4 days had passed. The 8 trusted generals, along with more than 200 guards, had already gathered the cultivation resources stored in various treasure vaults in the Divine Palace's conference hall. In the spacious hall, there were hundreds of treasure boxes of different colors piled up like a small mountain. Each treasure box was 1 meter long and 1 meter tall, and they all flickered with a faint divine light. There were array patterns engraved on each treasure box, and the name of each planet and the value of the tribute was written on it. There were 2 to 3 interspatial rings in each treasure box, and each ring was filled with cultivation resources. The Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler didn't need to check each one to estimate the total value of this batch of cultivation resources. The lowest value of each planet's tribute was 5 trillion. The total value of the tribute from more than 800 planets was more than 400 million. Such a terrifying amount of cultivation resources was enough to support the people of dozens of planets. Even though the Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler was experienced and knowledgeable, he was still shocked when he first heard the news from his subordinates. In the past, Divine King Chongfeng had been in charge of this matter, and he hadn't dared to overstep his authority. Now that he was personally handling this matter, he realized that the cultivation resources of the entire Heavenly Sun Domain were an earth-shattering amount of wealth. Moreover, this wasn't a one-time thing but a repeat every 50 years. The Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler paced back and forth in the meeting hall. He couldn't help but fall into deep thought as he stared at the mountain of treasure boxes. Most of the tributes sent by each planet are cultivation resources and materials below the Divine King level. Lord Supremacy has long surpassed the Divine King level, so what does he need these inferior resources for? No, I have to figure out this matter when I go to the depths of the void to escort the cultivation resources. Chapter 3991. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord pondered for a moment, then put the mountain of treasure boxes into his interspatial ring. Next he gathered a dozen trusted generals for a meeting and gave them some instructions. When all the generals were present, he announced to them that he had to go out for a while. This trip could take as long as 40 to 50 years and as short as 20 to 30 years. During this time they had to take good care of the Liang Star and the Heavenly Sun secret realm. At the same time, they had to maintain the peace and stability of the Heavenly Sun Star region. If anyone made a mistake, he would punish them severely when he returned. More than a dozen trusted generals hurriedly acknowledged the order and expressed that they would be loyal to their duties and would not neglect their duties. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord nodded with satisfaction and gestured for them to leave. A few of the generals took the opportunity to flatter him and told him to be careful on the way and to pay attention to his safety. A few generals also took the opportunity to ask him if he needed a large number of guards and a fleet to escort him. When would he leave? The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord said that he was going to carry out a secret mission to serve Lord Supremacy. In order to keep a low profile and keep it a secret, he would leave the Heavenly Sun Star region alone. He would leave early the next morning and did not need anyone to follow him. The generals wanted to curry favor and say more words of concern. However, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord did not want to expose his secret, so he ordered them to leave. After everyone left the main hall, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord also left with satisfaction. He did not know that Ji Tianxing had quietly returned to the Divine Palace a few hours ago. Ji Tianxing, who was hiding in the dark, had seen everything that had happened in the Great Meeting Hall. Originally, Ji Tianxing was still thinking that if he attacked the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord in the secret realm, he would definitely be surrounded by dozens of god kings. The god kings of foreign races who stayed in the secret realm were mostly intermediate god kings and a few upper god kings. They were unlike the fleet that he had destroyed previously. Although there were more than 100 god kings, most of them were lower god kings. If he attacked in the secret realm, he would definitely succeed and his life would not be in danger. However, he would not be able to keep it a secret and would definitely alarm everyone. Now, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord wanted to escort a batch of tributes to the depths of the void. Ji Tianxing no longer hesitated and immediately came up with a plan. The Heavenly Sun Protector left the Liang Star alone without any attendants or guards to escort this batch of tributes to the Nine-God Emperor. Then I'll wait for him to leave the blazing sun star before I make my move in the void. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing waited patiently. Tomorrow morning he would secretly follow the Heavenly Sun Realm Master and leave the secret realm and planet Liang. However, since he was bored, he secretly tried to find out what the Heavenly Sun Protector was doing in the study. The results surprised him. Just now, the Heavenly Sun Region Lord had told his trusted generals that he had to deal with some government affairs and would leave early the next morning. Unexpectedly, the Heavenly Sun Region Master didn't return to his study to deal with government affairs. After leaving the meeting hall, he hid his whereabouts and quietly flew out of the Celestial Palace. Although the Heavenly Sun Region Lord was a fake peak divine king, Ji Tianxing didn't care about him at all. However, the Tianyang Protectorate Master had managed to fool everyone in the Divine Palace. Ji Tianxing hurriedly followed the Heavenly Sun Region Lord and flew toward the exit of the secret realm. While he was on his way, he was still pondering silently. How could the Heavenly Sun Region Lord be so cunning and treacherous? How could he secretly leave the secret realm behind everyone's back? Could it be that he sensed danger and realized that I was secretly watching him? Or did he find out that the fleet had been destroyed? Or is he just too paranoid and guarded against his generals and experts? Ji Tianxing secretly pondered for a while. He felt that the Heavenly Sun Region Lord couldn't have discovered that he was secretly watching him. Also, he wouldn't have found out that the fleet had been destroyed so quickly. There was only one answer. The Heavenly Sun Region Lord was too paranoid and guarded against his generals and experts. These sinister and cunning people are all paranoid by nature. They can't be trusted. This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind. He despised the Heavenly Sun Region Lord. After leaving the secret realm, the Heavenly Sun Region Lord quietly flew high into the sky. It didn't take long for him to pass through the space barrier and enter the vast void. When he arrived in the dark and cold void, he revealed himself and took out an upper-grade king-grade divine warship. This 2,000-foot-long golden divine warship was extremely luxurious and exquisite. It was also set up with countless defensive divine arrays. It was obvious that the Heavenly Sun Region Lord cherished his life very much. He had even built his divine warship into a mobile fortress. Previously, the Heavenly Sun Region Lord had told his trusted generals that he wouldn't bring any attendants or guards and would carry out the mission alone. In reality, there were 6 god kings and 300 elite upper-grade divine lords on the divine warship. These people were his most trusted attendants and guards. The Heavenly Sun Region Lord entered the divine warship and meditated in a secret room. 2 god kings in charge of steering the divine warship steered it into the depths of the void. Everything went smoothly and very discreetly. However, the Heavenly Sun Region Lord didn't know that a pitch-black divine sword was following the divine warship unhurriedly tens of thousands of miles behind it. The divine sword was one with the void. It didn't emit any light, aura, or energy waves. No matter how careful the Heavenly Sun Region Lord was, he wouldn't be able to detect its presence. Time quietly passed. 7 days passed without him noticing. The Heavenly Sun Region Lord's divine warship had already flown 1.5 billion miles away from Liang Star. He was completely relieved when he saw that the journey was peaceful and that there weren't any accidents. After giving orders to the 2 god kings steering the divine warship, he prepared to cultivate in seclusion in a secret room. If nothing unexpected happened, he would cultivate in seclusion for 20 years. By then, the divine worship would have reached the depths of the void and he would be able to see Lord Supreme. In fact, when Ji Tianxing learned that the Heavenly Sun Region Lord was escorting a tribute to the Nine-God Emperor, he had considered whether he should intervene. If he didn't, he could follow the Heavenly Sun Region Lord's divine worship into the depths of the void to see what the 5 God Emperors were up to. However, after careful consideration, he decided not to make contact with the 5 God Emperors for the time being. After all, the 5 God Emperors already knew that he had been reborn. It was just that they were being held back by the void and couldn't leave. That was why he had been able to survive until now. However, if he went near the void, it would be tantamount to suicide. Given the nature of the 5 God Emperors, once they discovered his existence, they would definitely destroy him at all costs. He wasn't even a peak God King, so how could he withstand the 5 God Emperors' attacks? With this in mind, Ji Tianxing decided to play it safe and not meet the 5 God Emperors for the time being. He would first play the sidelines and disrupt the schemes of the 5 God Emperors. He would kill the God Emperor's lackeys and indirectly weaken the power of the God Emperors. When the time was right, he would make direct contact with the 5 God Emperors. Therefore, after 7 days, he made his move on the Heavenly Sun Region Lord's divine worship. Chapter 3992. This time it was the same routine and the same familiar formula. Ji Tianxing sped up to catch up with the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord's divine worship and summoned the primordial chaos bell to seal off the area within 50,000 miles. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, the divine bell, which had expanded to 50,000 miles, enveloped the entire area. The divine worship was plunged into absolute darkness and filled with an invisible suppressive force. When the area was sealed off, the terrifying suppressive force enveloped the entire divine worship and reduced its speed by more than half. At the same time, the divine worship lit up with a dazzling divine light and an ear-piercing whistle sounded from within. Evidently, the 2 God Kings operating the divine worship had sensed that something was amiss and hurriedly issued a warning to wake everyone up. Immediately, shouts and yells came from the divine worship. Large batches of Divine Lord Realm Guards also rushed out from the various secret rooms and rooms. The guards and several God Kings who were meditating and cultivating in their rooms were alarmed. Everyone gathered together and asked each other what had happened. They also released their divine consciousness to check the situation outside the divine worship. The commotion inside the divine worship was so great that it woke up the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord, who was cultivating in seclusion. He had no choice but to end his seclusion. His face darkened as he stepped out of his secret room in anger. He was even more furious when he saw the divine worship in chaos and everyone's anxious and panicked expressions. "Quiet down, all of you. Shut up." The Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord roared angrily. His majestic voice reverberated throughout the divine worship. The 300 guards and the 4 God Kings all fell silent. Everyone's eyes were focused on the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord. The Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord asked in a low voice, "Who can tell me what happened?" The 300 guards didn't dare to utter a word. The 4 God Kings didn't know the situation either, but they could only bite the bullet and answer, "My lord, we are still investigating." "Investigate my ass." The Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord frowned and cursed angrily. He released his divine consciousness outside the divine worship to check the situation in the void. His expression changed when he saw that the divine worship was surrounded by pitch-black darkness and that everything within 50,000 miles was sealed off by a pitch-black barrier. Who used a divine artifact to seal this void? Such a powerful divine aura. Is it a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact? The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord knew very well that an ordinary king-grade divine artifact could seal off the void. However, there was no way it would be as stable as a mountain without leaking anything. It was even more impossible for it to have such a terrifying divine aura. Therefore, it was very likely that it was a king-grade divine artifact. Most of the people who have a king-grade divine artifact are peak divine kings. Looking at the other party's posture, it's clear that they want to deal with me. Who is it that wants to kill me? In the recent several hundred years, this seat also didn't offend any peak divine kings. The Heavenly Sun Domain Lord remained silent as these thoughts flashed through his mind. He was very vigilant and puzzled. At this moment, in the pitch-black void outside the divine worship, a dazzling golden sword light that could split heaven and earth lit up. Boom! Before anyone could react, the giant golden sword struck the divine worship with a deafening boom. The people in the divine worship only felt the divine worship tremble violently a few times before it broke apart. The terrifying golden sword light had cut the heavenly sun protectorate lord's worship in half. Divine light splashed out in all directions from the huge fracture. Countless fragments were thrown out and scattered in the void. More than 30 unlucky guards who happened to be standing near the fracture were killed on the spot by the sword light. Not even their corpses were left intact. They were reduced to pieces of flesh and blood that scattered in the void. The divine worship was destroyed and could no longer operate normally. It could only float in the void. The huge impact caused the two halves of the divine worship to violently tumble in the void. More than 200 guards were dizzy from the fall, and a deep sense of fear grew in their hearts. Only the heavenly sun protectorate lord was relatively calm. He knew that hiding in the broken divine worship was useless and would only make them targets. Therefore he shouted in a dignified tone, "Everyone, don't panic. Hold your weapons tightly and abandon the worship immediately." More than 200 guards and 6 divine kings were his confidants and were absolutely loyal. When they heard his shout, they immediately escaped from the broken divine worship without hesitation. Swoosh, swoosh. In a short while, everyone had escaped from the broken divine worship and gathered in the void. When everyone gathered, they finally saw that the culprit who had intercepted them was alone. He was a 1,000-foot-tall man from the dragon clan who was covered in golden armor. He looked sacred and dignified. He was handsome and valiant, and his entire body exuded an aura that looked down on the world. However, the golden armor covered his face, making it impossible to see his appearance clearly. This made him look rather mysterious. The heavenly sun protectorate lord and the others heaved a sigh of relief when they saw that their opponent was alone. The worry and fear in everyone's hearts dissipated, and they regained their calm and composure. The heavenly sun protectorate lord waved his hand, and the 6 divine kings immediately understood. They spread out with more than 200 guards and surrounded the young man. The young man in golden armor was very conceited. He was indifferent when he saw that everyone had formed a circle around him. He had no intention of breaking out. After the circle was formed, the heavenly sun protectorate lord shouted, "Who are you? Why did you intercept my worship? I don't know you and we have no enmity between us, right?" He knew that the young man was a peak divine king. However, the young man was alone and he did not take it to heart. The young man in golden armor was naturally Zhou Xian. He stared coldly at the heavenly sun protectorate lord and said in a deep voice, "Of course, we have no enmity between us, but you are Lu Zhiyang's lackey. You deserve to die." The 6 divine kings and more than 200 guards were stunned when they heard this. Everyone had the same question in their minds. Who is Lu Zhiyang? The others did not know, but the heavenly sun protectorate lord knew that the Lord Supreme who had helped him was the 9 Suns God Emperor. The heavenly sun protectorate lord suddenly understood many things, and his expression changed drastically. "You are Lord Supreme's enemy? You killed divine King Chongfeng a few decades ago, right?" Zhi Tianxing did not deny it. He said coldly, "Divine King Chongfeng is dead. It's your turn now." As expected, the heavenly sun protectorate lord frowned. He thought to himself that if he reported this news to Lord Supreme, it would be a great merit. However, he did not dare to act rashly as Zhi Tianxing was staring at him. He transmitted his voice to one of the divine kings behind him and asked him to send a message. Although he did not know Zhi Tianxing, he knew that the young man was Lord Supreme's enemy, and that he was the murderer of divine King Chongfeng. The divine king was stunned. He transmitted his voice to the heavenly sun protectorate lord, "You want me to send a message to Lord Supreme? However, I don't have the corresponding communication jade slip, so I can't contact him." The heavenly sun protectorate lord finally reacted. Only he and divine King Chongfeng were qualified to contact Lord Supreme. He hurriedly took out a special purple jade slip and handed it to the high-level divine king behind him. The divine king hurriedly reported the situation to Lord Supreme according to his request. Chapter 3993. When the God King sent the message, the heavenly sun protectorate master who had been on guard against Zhi Tianxing tensed up. He was afraid that Zhi Tianxing would suddenly attack and stop his subordinate from sending the message. But reality proved that he had worried too much. Ji Tianxing watched this scene expressionlessly and did nothing. Soon, the high-level God King finished writing the message and was about to send it out after injecting his divine power into the jade slip. But to his surprise, the jade slip floated in front of him and did not move at all. Why can't I send it out? The high-level God King was dumbfounded. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Master was also stunned. He turned his head to look at the flashing yet motionless jade slip, and his heart was filled with anxiety and doubt. How can this be? Did the jade slip fail? Impossible. I reported the situation to Lord Supremacy a few years ago. I understand now. This area has been sealed and even the jade slip can't fly out. Only a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact can have such an effect and power, right? The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Master looked at the pitch-black barrier that sealed the void and immediately guessed the truth. Although he was slightly regretful that he could not send out this extremely important news, he did not care too much about it. However, he didn't care too much about it, nor did he feel disappointed because of it. In his opinion, after killing Ji Tianxing together, he could still report the news to Lord Supremacy. At that time, his contribution would be even greater. This trip to the depths of the void to meet Lord Supremacy might be his opportunity and fortune. Thinking of this, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Master calmed down and waved his hand to give the order to attack. Everyone attack together and kill him at all costs. After receiving the order, the guards and God Kings who had been brimming with killing intent and were ready to fight immediately roared and roared. They swung their weapons and attacked Ji Tianxing. Everyone gave it their all and used their most violent divine abilities. They wanted to kill Ji Tianxing in the shortest amount of time so as to avoid unnecessary trouble. However, just as everyone attacked, the power of the primordial chaos spell suddenly erupted. A vast and invisible force pressed down on everyone's heads, suppressing them to the point that they could not lift their heads or straighten their backs. The surging divine power in everyone's bodies suddenly stopped. The power of their divine abilities and consummate skills were also greatly reduced. Even the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler, who was a pseudo-peak divine king, was weakened by 30%. The 6 high-level god kings and over 200 sir-gods had their fighting powers reduced by half. Swish, swish, rumble. Hundreds of divine abilities and sword auras flooded Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing turned a blind eye to it and blocked all the attacks with the hazy golden light around his body. He was completely unscathed as he charged out of the sky full of sword shadows and saber lights. He waved his divine sword and began a massacre. 10 directional vanishing shadows. With a low shout, his body emitted a white light, and 9 identical figures immediately appeared around him. Immediately, 10 Ji Tianxing attacked at the same time, attacking the surrounding divine lords and godly kings. Sword through heaven. Sun-shattering sword. Sword of burial of heaven. 7-star sword. Moon-breaking sword. Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers used different sword techniques at the same time. Thousands of sword auras flooded the sir-gods. Bang, bang, bang. A series of muffled booms could be heard as countless blood flowers bloomed in the crowd, and minced meat splashed all over the sky. Shrill screams came from the sky full of sword auras. It was especially shrill. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler saw with his own eyes that at least 100 guards were killed in an instant. His heart was filled with fear and he even had the thought of retreating. As a peak divine king, he could certainly see that Ji Tianxing was alone, but he had used a doppelganger technique to create 9 doppelgangers. What was more terrifying was that each doppelganger had half the strength of the original body, which was equivalent to a peak divine king. What was this? 10 peak divine kings surrounded him and 6 other sir-gods, and over 200 guards? Just thinking about it made the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler tremble with fear and almost suffocate. While he was in a daze, Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers quickly killed another batch of guards. When the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler came to his senses, he waved his divine saber furiously and attacked Ji Tianxing. More than 220 guards had died tragically. Only 50 guards and 6 sir-gods were left and they were still running away in panic. Bang! The Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler waved his divine saber and slashed at Ji Tianxing with all his might. However, before the saber aura could reach Ji Tianxing's head, it was blocked by Ji Tianxing's doppelgangers. A 1,000-foot-long golden sword slashed at him and knocked his divine saber away. The saber aura was also shattered. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler wanted to retreat immediately after his attack failed. However, Ji Tianxing suddenly teleported 100 miles away and appeared behind him, stabbing at him with his sword. Sword of Daytime. A dazzling cold light appeared when the sword stabbed out. Immediately after, the cold light expanded by 1,000,000,000 times and engulfed the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler. He had no time to dodge and could only form a divine light shield to block the power of the sword. There was no doubt about the result. Even a real Sir God could not block Ji Tianxing's sword. How could a fake Sir God block it? Kaboom! With a crisp shattering sound, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler's divine light shield collapsed on the spot. His divine body was also cut into pieces. Broken limbs and divine blood splattered across the void along with the sword aura. A fist-sized 5-colored godhead flew out in a panic and fled to the edge of the battlefield. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler was not the only one who was stunned by the outcome. Even the surviving guards and 6 Sir Gods were dumbfounded. No one had expected that the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler would be killed in an instant before all the guards and 6 Sir Gods were dead. Although he was not truly dead and his godhead remained, his divine body was destroyed. However, his divine body had been destroyed and the surrounding 50,000 miles was sealed. There was no way for his divine spark to escape. Isn't the Protectorate ruler a Sir God? How can he be so weak? His opponent is also a Sir God. How can the Protectorate ruler not even block one of his attacks? This thought flashed across the minds of the guards and the 6 Sir Gods at the same time. Even though they had seen it with their own eyes, they could not believe or accept this outcome. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler had always held a high position in their hearts and was also their spiritual pillar. Only now did they realize that this pillar was not as strong as they had imagined. Instead, it was ridiculously weak. Of course, no one cared about what these guards and Sir Gods thought. This was because Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers had killed everyone in the next 10 breaths. Regardless of whether it was the guards or the 6 Sir Gods, none of them could block a single attack from him and his doppelgangers. No matter who was hit, they were instantly killed. None of them survived. After 10 breaths, the void returned to silence. Only the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler's godhead was left. It had fled to the edge of the void and was blocked by the primordial chaos bell's wall. Chapter 3994. Before meeting Ji Tianxing, the Heavenly Sun Region Master would never have believed that a peak godly king could be so powerful. Even though he also knew that his peak divine king realm was slightly overstated. However, he believed that he had accumulated enough strength over the past few hundred years and could be considered a genuine peak godly king. In addition, he had never fought with a real peak godly king before, so he didn't know the difference between them. Only now did he realize that there was a world of difference in strength between peak godly kings. Even though it was humiliating, he had to admit that even 10 peak godly kings like him wouldn't be a match for Ji Tianxing. Is he really just a peak godly king? How can he be so powerful? He is Lord Supremacy's enemy. Could he be like Lord Supremacy, surpassing the godly king realm and reaching the god emperor realm? The Heavenly Sun Region Master thought about this question as he attacked the divine bell's wall. Unfortunately, he couldn't find an answer to this question and the wall couldn't be broken. After a few breaths, Ji Tianxing finished off all the guards and godly kings and rushed over. Ji Tianxing had already recalled his 9 doppelgangers, leaving only his main body to face the Heavenly Sun Region Master's godhead. He didn't waste any time talking to the Heavenly Sun Region Master. He waved the Sword of Burial of Heaven, wanting to shatter the Heavenly Sun Region Master's godhead and end the battle. The Heavenly Sun Region Master panicked and hurriedly shouted with his divine consciousness, "Stop! Stop, I surrender." In his opinion, this overly powerful guy didn't play by the rules. You've already won, so shouldn't you be showing off now? You're not going to interrogate me for secrets or boast, but you're going to kill me right away. Isn't that too vicious? What grudge do you have against me? The Sword of Burial of Heaven stopped. Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "It's useless to surrender. I don't accept captives." Oh no. Seeing how cold and heartless he was, the Heavenly Sun Region Master hurriedly tried to persuade him. "I admit that I was wrong to seek refuge under the 9 Suns God Emperor. However, there is no grudge between us. Why do you have to kill me? There's nothing we can't discuss. We should have a good talk." Seeing the Heavenly Sun Region Lord's strong desire to live, Ji Tianxing raised his brows and asked, Talk about what? The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord thought for a moment and asked, since you are the enemy of the Nine Suns God Emperor, you must want to know where he is and seek revenge, right? It had to be said that the Heavenly Sun Region Lord had grasped the main point. The question he raised was indeed what Ji Tianqing was most concerned about. However, Ji Tianqing said in an indifferent tone, this king knows where he is. I do not plan on taking revenge on him for the time being. The Heavenly Sun Region Master was speechless. He increasingly felt that this person wasn't following the rules. But in order to survive, he quickly changed the topic and said, don't you want to know where I'm going and what mission I'm going to carry out? I know. Ji Tianqing frowned slightly. He was getting impatient. The Heavenly Sun Region Master sped up and explained, I'm going to the depths of the void to deliver a batch of expensive cultivation resources to the Nine Suns God Emperor. As long as you spare my life, I can take you to the Nine Suns God Emperor and give you the batch of resources. You should know that the value of the resources is more than 400 million. Even if you are a peak divine king, I'm afraid you have never seen so much wealth, right? An ordinary peak divine king might have been tempted. However, Ji Tianqing's expression didn't change. He said coldly, this king said that I don't want to see the Nine Suns God Emperor for the time being. As for the 40,000 trillion cultivation resources, they are stored in your interspatial ring. This king has already obtained them. Do I still need you to deliver them to me? As he spoke, he opened his left palm. There was an interspatial ring in the middle of his palm. It was the ring that had been left behind in the void after the Heavenly Sun Region Master's divine body had been destroyed. Ji Tianqing had just taken it. The Heavenly Sun Region Master's expression became very ugly, but he still refused to give up. He put on a fierce front and said, so what if you have my interspatial ring? I only need a thought to make the interspatial ring collapse. The cultivation resources stored in it will also be scattered in the void and the alternate spacetime. You won't be able to get them. The contempt in Ji Tianqing's eyes deepened. He sneered and said, is that so? Then why don't you try and see if you can still control this ring? He held the interspatial ring in his left hand and looked at the Heavenly Sun Region Master's godhead. The corners of his mouth curled into a sneer. The Heavenly Sun Region Master urged his divine telekinesis to control the interspatial ring and make it collapse on the spot. Unfortunately, the interspatial ring was sealed by an invisible force. His divine telekinesis couldn't contact it. Simply put, he had lost control of the interspatial ring. Ji Tianqing squeezed the interspatial ring again. He urged his divine power to cast a divine technique and forcibly erased the spiritual imprint in the interspatial ring. As a result, the connection between the Heavenly Sun Region Master and the interspatial ring was completely cut off. The Heavenly Sun Region Master no longer had any bargaining chips to negotiate with Ji Tianqing. He despaired on the spot. He watched as Ji Tianqing raised the sword of burial of heaven and was about to silence him. The Heavenly Sun Region Master was extremely anxious. He quickly begged, I don't want to die yet. Senior, please let me go. As long as you spare my life, I'm willing to be your servant and do whatever you want me to do. If you want information about the Nine Suns God Emperor, I can get it for you. He had once respected, worshipped, and was very loyal to the Nine Suns God Emperor. However, under the threat of death, he was willing to betray the Nine Suns God Emperor in exchange for his life. However, Ji Tianqing had always hated this kind of treacherous foreign race. He didn't need such a shameless servant. He couldn't be bothered to listen to the Heavenly Sun Region Master's nonsense. The sword of burial of heaven slashed down without hesitation. Crack. Although the Heavenly Sun Region Master knew that he was going to die, he still tried his best to dodge. However, he was too weak and couldn't avoid the sword in the end. With a crisp cracking sound, the Heavenly Sun Region Master's godhead was shattered on the spot, turning into a dozen fragments of godhead. The pseudo-peak Supreme God King had fallen just like that. Ji Tianqing put away the sword of burial of heaven, waved his hand and sent out a ray of golden light to collect the Heavenly Sun Region Master's godhead fragments. Then he turned and left. There were many miscellaneous items floating in the void within a radius of 50,000 miles. There were huge wreckages of divine warships, all kinds of resources, treasure chests and metal fragments. There were also many fragments of weapons and armor, as well as the godhead fragments of the guards and supreme god kings. Ji Tianxing cleaned up the battlefield and cleaned up the void, leaving no trace behind. Other than the 6 godhead fragments of the godheads, he kept them for future refinement. He didn't care about the other spoils of war. He threw them all into the heaven patching pearl, waiting for it to refine them and replenish the power of the 5 elements world. Of course, the heaven patching pearl had been devouring the star fragments and cultivation resources worth hundreds of trillions. The heaven patching pearl wouldn't stop for the next 200 years. The wreckages of divine warships, godhead fragments of divine lords, and divine weapons and armor fragments would probably have to wait for another 200 years. Chapter 3995. Ji Tianxing killed the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord without wasting any time to interrogate him about the Heaven-Sealing Dragon Emperor. After all, he could refine the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord's godhead fragments and extract his memories. This would save him a lot of time and effort. After cleaning up the battlefield, Ji Tianxing put away the primordial chaos spell and entered the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Next, the Sword of Burial of Heaven left the Heavenly Sun Star Zone and headed to the next star zone. Ji Tianxing returned to the distorted space-time of the Divine Pagoda and checked his spoils of war. There were 20 trillion worth of cultivation resources stored in the interspatial rings of the 6 superior God Kings. Ji Tianxing picked out the God King level resources and treasures and kept 6 Godhead fragments. The rest of the cultivation resources and treasures were thrown into the heaven-mending orb to cultivate the 5 elements world. Ji Tianxing then opened the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord's interspatial ring. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord had controlled the entire star zone for nearly 1,000 years and had accumulated a lot of wealth. Although half of his wealth and resources were stored in the treasury of the Heavenly Sun's secret realm, the interspatial ring only contained half of the wealth. But it was still a shocking amount of wealth, worth hundreds of trillion. Ji Tianxing picked out the God King level resources and treasures and stored them in his interspatial ring. The rest of the ordinary cultivation resources were stored in the distorted spacetime for everyone to use. Finally, he focused his attention on the thousands of treasure boxes. Each treasure box wasn't big, 1 foot long and 5 inches wide. The treasure boxes were exquisitely made and seemed to be of the same standard. Ji Tianxing knew at a glance that these were the tributes collected by the Heavenly Sun Star Zone. Each treasure box contained the cultivation resources accumulated by a star over the past 50 years. Before his death, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord had mentioned that if he spared his life, he would give 40 trillion worth of cultivation resources to Ji Tianxing. This sounded like an astronomical number, but there were thousands of worlds in the entire star zone. On average, each world had 40 trillion worth of cultivation resources, which wasn't an exaggeration. Ji Tianxing opened the boxes one by one and checked the spatial rings inside as well as the cultivation resources in the rings. He thought to himself, 40,000 trillion worth of cultivation resources is enough for a peak divine king to cultivate for hundreds of thousands of years. What was the 9 Suns God Emperor doing? Why did he need so many cultivation resources? And this was only the tribute from the Heavenly Sun Star region. If the tribute from the divine world was included, the amount would be even more ridiculous. Could it be that the gray fog is a bottomless pit that keeps devouring cultivation resources? Ji Tianxing pondered. When the time was right in the future, he had to figure out the mystery of the gray fog. He spent half a day to count the thousands of treasure boxes and put them all into his spatial ring. After that, he began to cultivate in seclusion, devouring the godhead fragments of the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord and the 6 God Kings. Those 6 high-level God Kings were not weak. Only 2 of them were in the 7th stage realm while the other 4 were in the 8th stage realm. They had mastered more than 500 types of divine Dao laws. One of the God Kings had actually condensed more than 700 types of divine Dao laws. After Ji Tianxing refined their godhead fragments, he took away 40 types of divine Dao laws and his strength increased slightly. Next, he refined the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord's godhead fragments. Although the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord was a pseudo-peak divine king, he was a product of haste and his strength was inferior to an ordinary peak divine king. But he had mastered 900 types of divine Dao laws and had cultivated for nearly 20,000 years. Ji Tianxing not only refined his soul memories, but also took away 30 types of divine Dao laws. Now, the number of divine Dao laws he had mastered had reached 1,070 types. This number had already surpassed his previous life and all the current peak divine kings. While Ji Tianqing was excited, he couldn't help but fantasize. It is said that after the creation of the world, there were 3,000 great Daos in the world, which were then evolved into billions of minor Daos by countless living beings. If one day I can gather 3,000 types of divine Dao laws, what will the result be? Of course, since ancient times, no one had ever heard of anyone who could gather 3,000 types of divine Dao laws. There weren't even any legends or stories related to this, and no one had ever speculated or estimated it. Ji Tianqing only had a sudden whim, but he quickly dispelled this unrealistic idea. Then he began to organize the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord's soul memories, sorting out useful clues and information. He originally thought that the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord had some understanding of the Nine Suns God Emperor and might be able to find out some secrets. But in reality, the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord didn't know the Nine Suns God Emperor as well as God King Changfeng, so he basically didn't know any secrets. As for clues and information about Dragon Emperor Sealing Sky, he didn't find anything. Ji Tianqing analyzed for a long time and finally came to a conclusion. When Dragon Emperor Sealing Sky died 1,000 years ago, he didn't even come to the Heavenly Sun territory. This result made Ji Tianqing slightly depressed and disappointed. But he quickly collected his emotions and began to look forward to the next destination. Heavenly Lion Territory. Ji Tianqing hadn't been to that territory, but he had heard from the sacred Dragon Emperor that the Heavenly Lion Territory was controlled by the god of the underworld. The territorial lord of the Heavenly Lion Territory was a puppet supported by the god of the underworld. Back then, the god of the underworld had even made the Heavenly Lion Territory wage war in a vain attempt to conquer the Heavenly Stalwarts Territory. But the sacred Dragon Emperor had led the Heavenly Stalwarts Territory's strong practitioners to fight back and ultimately defeated the god of the underworld's scheme. The Heavenly Stalwarts Territory wasn't far from the Heavenly Lion Territory. When Ji Tianqing arrived at the Heavenly Lion Territory, he would soon be able to see Ji Wuhan, who was still cultivating there. 1 month later, the Burial of Heaven sword was still flying through the void and was about to leave the Heavenly Sun Territory. At this moment, a piece of news suddenly broke out in the Heavenly Sun Territory, causing many strong practitioners to fall into chaos. The news came from the Liang Star. It was said that the Deputy Territorial Lord had revealed it. It was said that the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord had disappeared for a month with the entire territory's tribute, which was worth 40,000 trillion cultivation resources, and mysteriously died. At first, all the Star Lords were shocked and couldn't believe it when they heard the news. But the Deputy Territorial Lord had announced the news. Everyone knew that the Deputy Territorial Lord was loyal to the Territorial Lord and was his most capable assistant. Of course, he wouldn't speak blindly. And the Star Lords believed that the 40,000 trillion cultivation resources were true. After all, every Star Lord had contributed 40 trillion worth of cultivation resources. There were 1,000 worlds in the entire Heavenly Sun Territory, which added up to exactly 40,000 trillion. But no one could figure out why the Territorial Lord, who controlled the entire Heavenly Sun Territory, would take away 40,000 trillion worth of resources. Why had the Territorial Lord disappeared for a month without any news, and then suddenly died? The Territorial Lord was a peak divine king. Who could kill him? All kinds of questions filled the minds of many strong practitioners, causing the various worlds to fall into worry, anxiety, and suspicion. Many people thought that this was a fight between the Territorial Lord, the Deputy Territorial Lord, and the ministers. It seemed that someone was plotting to seize the Territorial Lord's position. Most of the Territorial Lords were only concerned about the whereabouts of the 40,000 trillion worth of resources. If those tributes were lost, would every Star Lord have to hand them over again? Chapter 3996. The entire Tianyang Star Zone was talking about the disappearance and death of the Zone Lord. All kinds of rumors and speculations were circulating in nearly 1,000 worlds. The situation began to become turbulent. Many Star Lords smelled the scent of change and danger, so they gathered their forces and secretly formed alliances. On the Liang Star, the Deputy Zone Lord and many generals were also very busy. They not only had to investigate the truth of the Zone Lord's death, but also calm the chaos on the Liang Star and appease the Star Lords. Even many generals began to secretly form alliances with each other, intending to seize the position of the Zone Lord. The situation became more and more chaotic. The deputy zone lord and dozens of the zone lord's trusted generals became more and more powerless. Half a month later, when the situation became more and more intense and gradually out of their control, the deputy zone lord began to regret announcing the news of the zone lord's death. If he had known this would happen, he would have resisted the pressure of the generals and kept the news a secret. He would have used decades to gradually take over the position of the zone lord. But now many generals and star lords were having second thoughts. If he announced that he would take over the position of the zone lord, many star lords would oppose him and the Tianyang star zone would be torn apart again. Finally, after 3 days of calm consideration, the deputy zone lord decided to report the situation to Lord Supreme and ask for instructions. In the entire Tianyang star zone, only the zone lord could contact Lord Supreme. When the zone lord left the Liang star, he took the special communication jade slip with him. Fortunately, there was a top-secret divine array in a secret room deep in the divine palace. It was a divine array used for communication, and it had only been used once since it was built. When the divine palace was first established, the divine array was set up to contact Lord Supremacy. Early in the morning, the deputy zone lord summoned a dozen of the zone lord's trusted generals and rushed to the secret room. The dozen trusted generals were the experts who had been summoned by the zone lord before he left to guard the Liang star zone and the entire star zone. Apart from the deputy zone lord, these people had the most power. The deputy region master admitted that with his prestige and power, he would not be able to suppress these powerful officials. Therefore he had to use Lord Supreme Martial Artist as his backing. He believed that no matter how arrogant these officials were, they would not dare to disobey Lord Supreme. After everyone entered the gloomy secret room, they stood in a straight line. The deputy region master personally cast a spell to activate the altar that had a radius of 10 feet. Swoosh. Swish swish swish. Along with the flickering of divine light, the 10-meter-tall altar was successfully activated. 18 resplendent pillars of light lit up, forming a huge mysterious pattern. The pattern was like a sea of stars. There were millions of stars and among them there were 9 dazzling suns. As the huge diagram slowly rotated, the millions of stars and the 9 blazing suns also slowly rotated. It was as if the sun and moon rose from the east and set in the west. The deputy region master and the 16 ministers stood with their hands at their sides. Their postures were respectful as they waited patiently. After waiting for a full 10 breaths of time, there were still no changes to the altar or the pattern. Everyone couldn't help but mutter in their hearts. A few of the powerful ministers also began to discuss secretly via voice transmission. What's going on? Why is there no reaction at all? Deputy Region Master said that this divine array can contact Lord Supreme Martial Artist. I wonder if it's true? He wouldn't dare to joke about something like this, would he? Maybe Lord Supreme is very busy and has no time to pay attention to us? I wonder what Lord Supreme's reaction will be when he finds out that the Domain Lord is dead. Just as they were discussing secretly, the pattern of stars and 9 suns above the altar suddenly formed a white light screen. A picture gradually appeared on the light screen, becoming clearer and clearer. Everyone quickly stopped talking and stared at the picture on the light screen, their faces full of anticipation. After a while, the picture on the light screen stabilized and became quite clear. Everyone could see clearly that the picture was a vast dark starry sky, and they could vaguely see the stars in the distance. In the middle of the picture was a huge god that was tens of thousands of feet tall, and his whole body was shining with golden light. The god had 2 feet, 2 arms and 2 heads. There were also 6 golden wings on his back, and his whole body was surrounded by dazzling divine light. Although the appearance of this god could not be seen clearly, everyone could feel a strong pressure and a sacred aura through the light screen. Behind the golden god, in the dark void in the distance, there was a huge gray cloud. Although only a corner of the gray cloud could be seen, it occupied the entire light screen. The deputy domain lord and the ministers could vaguely see that there seemed to be thousands of gods near the gray cloud, casting spells in groups. There were also many divine ships cruising back and forth, looking very busy. No one knew what the gray clouds were, nor did they know what the gods were doing. However, they knew that the god in the light screen with unparalleled divine might and shining with golden light should be the backer of the domain of Heavenly Sun, their lord. Greetings, Lord Supreme. Without any hesitation, The deputy domain lord and the ministers bowed to the light screen in a very respectful manner. Lord Supreme's face was covered by the golden light. However, everyone could see that his golden eyes were coldly staring at everyone. "Who is it? Why have you activated the emergency communication array?" A man's voice, which sounded like it was made of metal, came from the light screen. His tone was cold and indifferent, without any emotion. The deputy domain lord and the ministers felt the pressure of Lord Supreme, and their nerves were tense and uneasy. Everyone was silent. Only the deputy domain lord braced himself and explained, "Lord Supreme, I am the deputy domain lord of the Tianyang Star region. I have something important to report." "Speak." Lord Supreme's words were short and his tone did not change at all. The deputy domain lord did not dare to talk nonsense. He hurriedly cupped his hands and reported, "A month ago the domain lord collected tributes from nearly 1,000 worlds and left the Liang star with 40,000 trillion cultivation resources. He escorted the tributes to the depths of the void to deliver them to Lord Supreme. Originally, the domain lord said he would leave the next morning, but he left quietly that night. When we found out the next day, we felt that something was wrong. After that, we tried to contact the domain lord every 2 days, but he did not respond. A month later, we realized that something was wrong, so we went to check the domain lord's divine soul jade tablet. Unexpectedly, the domain lord's divine soul jade tablet had been broken." Lord Supreme was still expressionless when he heard this. He asked indifferently, "You mean the domain lord of the Tianyang Star region is dead?" "Yes." The deputy domain lord nodded. Lord Supreme asked again, "Did you find out the cause of his death? Who did it? Did you get the tributes back?" The deputy domain lord looked ashamed and replied, "After the incident, I sent several groups of elite soldiers in the direction of the domain lord's departure. They explored billions of miles of the void but found nothing. As for the tributes, they have disappeared." Chapter 3997. Lord Supreme Master did not react to the news of the Tianyang Protectorate Lord's death. However, when he heard that the tribute worth 40,000 trillion had been lost, Lord Supreme Master frowned and his eyes turned cold. "No matter what, we have to find the lost tribute. If we can't find it, we have to collect it again. We can't delay my plans," Lord Supreme Master ordered in a dignified tone. The Deputy Protectorate Lord and the dozen or so ministers bowed their heads in fear and hurriedly said yes. Lord Supreme Master said again, "Continue." The Deputy Protectorate Lord continued to report, "When we heard the news of the Protectorate Lord's death, we decided to announce it to the public and collect clues about his death. We didn't expect that after the news spread, the stars would not help us with the investigation. Instead, the situation became chaotic. The situation in the Tianyang Star Zone is getting more and more complicated, and it could be torn apart at any time. I am reporting this to you because I want to listen to your instructions." How shrewd was the Nine Suns God Emperor! Of course, he knew that the Deputy Protectorate Lord wanted his approval to succeed the position of Protectorate Lord. He despised the Deputy Protectorate Lord's scheming. However, he did not care who the Tianyang Protectorate Lord was. He only wanted the Protectorate Lord to be obedient and provide him with a steady stream of cultivation resources. Therefore, the Nine Suns God Emperor said expressionlessly, "The position of Protectorate Lord is empty. Naturally, there will be people who covet it and want to take the opportunity to cause trouble. However, I will not allow the Tianyang Star Zone to fall into chaos, let alone delay my plans. Aren't you the Deputy Protectorate Lord? Since the Protectorate Lord is dead, you will succeed the position of Protectorate Lord." When he finally heard these words and got the answer he wanted, the Deputy Protectorate Lord was ecstatic and grateful. Without any hesitation, he bowed and said in an excited tone, "Thank you very much for your appreciation and promotion, Your Highness. Your subordinate will work his heart out, sweat his guts out, and do his best to be loyal to you and carry out any of your orders." The dozen or so ministers had mixed feelings, especially those who wanted to compete for the position of Protectorate Lord. They were full of resentment. However, Lord Supreme Master had already appointed the position of Protectorate Lord. They could only accept it and did not dare to question it. The new Zone Master bowed and thanked him again before he calmed down. Lord Jizun then exhorted, "After you succeed as the Domain Lord, you must first deal with these matters. The first was to recover the lost tribute and investigate the cause of the previous governor's death. If they couldn't get the tribute back, they would collect it again and send their trusted subordinates and elites to escort it back. Secondly, we need to stabilize the situation in the Heavenly Sun Star region. No matter what, we can't let the star region fall into chaos. Of course, the new zone leader nodded his head like a chick pecking at rice. Just like that, the communication ended. The images on the white light screen disappeared, and the constellations and the 9 suns disappeared as well. The altar stopped operating. The new territorial lord turned around and looked at the dozen or so ministers with a smile on his face. He puffed out his chest and raised his head and said in a proud tone, "Everyone has heard that the Supreme Lord has appointed me as the new territorial lord. Pass down my orders. Tomorrow will be the day of my succession ceremony. Also, the things that Lord Supreme Martial Artist has instructed us to do must be done immediately, and must not be delayed." Now that he had become the new domain lord, of course he would flaunt his prowess and be full of pride. The dozen or so ministers cursed in their hearts, but they didn't dare to raise any objections. At the same time, in the deepest part of the void, in the dark and cold void near the enigmatic gray fog, the 9 Sun God Emperor, who had just ended the long-distance communication, stood quietly in the void, frowning as he pondered. A few decades ago, God King Chongfeng, who had served me for many years, was killed by a mysterious elite. Now the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord has also mysteriously died, and even the tribute was lost. When did a peak God King appear in the 9-star regions? How could he have such strength and means? After frowning and pondering for a moment, the 9 Sun God Emperor suddenly thought of something and muttered to himself. A few decades ago, Yu Ming told us that Kenshin had returned. He appeared on the Reincarnation Island in the Divine Realm, passed through the passage between the 2 worlds and fled to the Dragon Realm. God King Chongfeng died in the Heavenly Sun Domain, and the Heavenly Scorpion Domain Lord died in the Heavenly Sun Domain. These 2 domains are very close to the Dragon Realm. Could it be that Kenshin killed God King Chongfeng and the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord? The 9 Sun God Emperor came to a conclusion when he thought of the enmity of the past. Both Azura and Netherworld swore that the Sword God had been reborn. If this news is true, then he should be the main culprit. He didn't dare to seek revenge on me, so he wantonly killed my subordinates to take revenge and ruin my plans. Kenshin, oh Kenshin, so what if you're lucky enough to survive and return? As long as you dare to appear in front of us, any one of us God Emperors can crush you with a wave of our hand. The 9 Sun God Emperor wasn't angry or enraged even after coming to this conclusion. In fact, he didn't feel the slightest sense of urgency or worry even after Kenshin had returned to the peak God King realm. This was because he and the other 4 God Emperors had grasped the power of the Heavenly Tao and were the closest existences to the Heavenly Tao. Even if Kenshin was a peak God King, he was still an ant in their eyes. However, his main body had to stay near the enigmatic fog and couldn't leave. Even if Kenshin deliberately targeted him and took revenge on him, he didn't have any good ideas at the moment. After some thought, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. A few decades ago, Kenshin was still in the Scorpio star zone. He passed through the Sirius star zone and has now arrived in the Tianyang star zone. He killed the ruler of the Tianyang star zone and took the tribute, but he didn't occupy it. In that case, he should have left the Tianyang star zone and gone to other star zones to continue stirring up trouble. The closest star zone to the Tianyang star zone is the Tianyang star zone, which is the god of the underworld's territory. At this thought, the 9 Sun God Emperor took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to the god of the underworld to warn him. On the other side of the enigmatic fog, the cold and powerful god of the underworld, who was tens of thousands of meters tall and emanated a black aura of death, was focused on casting a spell. He constantly released tens of thousands of rays of divine light into a certain area of the enigmatic fog. The fog in that area was slowly dissipating and had already formed a vortex. Behind the god of the underworld were tens of thousands of god lords and god kings, arranged in various formations and working together to cast a spell to help him. In the void of space within 100,000 kilometers, people came and went and divine warships shuttled back and forth. At this moment, a ray of light flew through the void and landed beside him. As the God Emperor, he had far too many matters to attend to. However, he delegated most of them to his trusted subordinates. There weren't many people who could directly contact him, only a few. As soon as he saw the communication jade slip, he knew that something must have happened. And it was no small matter. Chapter 3998. The god of the underworld did not stop casting the spell. He reached out with one hand, took the communication jade slip and read its contents. When he finished reading the message, his face darkened, and his eyes flashed with a sinister light. Kenshin. It's you again, you damned thief. Back then on Reincarnation Island, you were lucky enough to escape to the Dragon Realm. I didn't expect that you would try to ruin my plans again after entering the Outer Realm. This time I won't let you succeed. Your time has come. After cursing under his breath, the god of the underworld put away the communication jade slip and summoned a few of his trusted generals. There were 5 of them. The leader was a peak godly king and the other 4 were all 9th-tier godly kings. They came before the god of the underworld. After bowing respectfully they asked, "Your Majesty, what are your orders?" The god of the underworld said in a dignified tone, "Set out immediately. Follow me to the Heavenly Lion Galaxy to deal with an enemy." He did not explain much to the godly kings under him. They only needed to carry out his orders. However, the peak godly king in the lead was stunned. He lowered his voice and asked, "Your Majesty, can you leave this place?" The god of the underworld glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "Of course I can't leave. This is an important matter. How can I ignore it? I'll send an avatar to take you there." The godly kings came to a realization and quickly bowed to accept the order. Then the godly kings followed the god of the underworld's avatar and left the gray fog, rushing to the Heavenly Lion Galaxy. The gray fog was still bustling with activity. It did not affect anything. After all, the god of the underworld had more than one peak godly king under his command. There were even more than 200 high-level godly kings. The god of the underworld's avatar drove a divine ship and hurried along with 5 godly kings. Along the way, the incarnation of the god of the underworld took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to the Heavenly Lion Sector's leader. This message was to remind the Heavenly Lion Region Lord to take precautions and prepare for battle. At the same time, he also informed the Heavenly Lion Region Lord that his clone would lead 5 divine kings to guard the place. Other than that, he also mentioned another person, Tian Shu, who studied under the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and served as a divine general. This person was the young master of the heaven-punishing race, one of the top geniuses in the mortal world. Back then, the god of the underworld had saved him from the lower realm and taken him in as his last disciple. The god of the underworld had important matters to attend to, so he could not bring Dubhe with him to teach him. Thus, he left Dubhe in the Heavenly Lion Galaxy to be nurtured by the region master. Every 10 years, the god of the underworld would send a message asking about the Sky Pivot. This time he mentioned Sky Pivot to ask about Sky Pivot's progress. Not long after, the god of the underworld received a reply from the Sky Lion Region Lord. The Sky Lion Region Lord said that he would be on full alert and would not let Kenshin's scheme succeed. As for Sky Pivot, he was now a middle-level divine lord and his strength was improving rapidly. The god of the underworld was slightly comforted by this news. 2 months later, the Heavenly Sun Galaxy had a new region lord, and the situation gradually stabilized. The new region lord was unable to find out the cause of the previous region lord's death, nor was he able to recover the lost tributes. Therefore, the new region lord could only order the star lords of thousands of worlds to pay the tributes again. The rules were the same as before. Each planet had to hand over 40 trillion worth of resources. As soon as this order was issued, nearly 1,000 worlds were in an uproar. Countless star lords cursed angrily and billions of civilians complained. For a time, many star lords united to protest to the new region lord. However, the new region lord relied on the support of Lord Prime and did not listen to the complaints of the star lords. He just kept forcing them. Undercurrents surged in the major planets, and the resistance of the star lords and civilians became more and more intense. Although they did not dare to openly rebel against the new territorial lord and the forces under his command, they did not dare to do so. However, they joined forces and secretly agreed that no one was allowed to give in. They had to stall for time. As for how the new region lord would deal with it, no one knew. However, the Heavenly Sun Galaxy was destined to not be peaceful. It would definitely become more chaotic in the future. At this time, the Sword of Burial of Heaven had already left the Heavenly Sun Galaxy, crossed the vast galaxy and entered the Heavenly Lion Galaxy. Along the way, the Burial of Heaven found many abandoned planets with rich mineral veins. However, Ji Tianqing was not interested in them. He had been cultivating in seclusion in the Divine Tower, trying to improve his strength. He was only a step away from becoming a peak Divine King and could break through at any time. However, the Sword of Burial of Heaven had been traveling for 2 months, and he had been cultivating in seclusion for 8 years, but there were no signs of a breakthrough. Ji Tianqing knew that it would be difficult to break through the shackles if he just cultivated in seclusion. If he wanted to become a peak Divine King, he had to obtain some kind of opportunity or experience danger and hardship. 3 months later, the Sword of Burial of Heaven arrived at the central region of the Heavenly Lion Galaxy. Ji Tianqing also ended his seclusion and appeared in the void. There was a larger planet in front of him. There was a spatial barrier and divine light. It must be a world inhabited by living beings. Therefore, he descended on that planet to inquire about some information. He stayed on this star for 10 days. Using all sorts of methods, he inquired about the news from several Divine King powerhouses. Only then did he know that the region lord of the Heavenly Lion Galaxy lived in the prosperous Heavenly Lion Galaxy, in the famous Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven. That planet was in the central region of the galaxy. If he continued forward, he would reach it after crossing more than 10 planets. The region lord of the Heavenly Lion region was a 9th stage Divine King expert. He had tens of millions of elite soldiers under his command and firmly controlled the entire galaxy. Of course, the situation of this galaxy was very similar to that of the Heavenly Sun Galaxy. All the planets were controlled by the region lord, and trillions of living beings were slaves of the region lord and Lord Supreme. They had to constantly collect cultivation resources and hand them over to the Star Lord, who then handed them over to the region lord. In addition, on every planet, every continent, and every city in every divine kingdom, there were statues of the region lord and Lord Supreme. No matter which race they were from, they had to worship Lord Supreme in order to be protected. When Ji Tianqing was inquiring about the news on that planet, he had also seen the statue of Lord Supreme a few times. Although the face of Lord Supreme carved on the statue was a little blurry, he could still recognize that it was the usual appearance of the god of the underworld. There was one thing that had to be said. Many divine kings could use divine abilities and spells to change their appearance at will. However, the vast majority of experts had a common appearance. Just like Ji Tianqing, he used to look like a human youth in the divine realm. After arriving at the dragon realm, he took on the appearance of a young dragon, Long Tian. And now, Long Tian was his usual appearance. After inquiring about the news, Ji Tianqing returned to the void and rode the Burial of Heaven to the Heavenly Lion Galaxy. On the way, the Burial of Heaven remembered what happened back then and reminded him, when you were in the divine realm, you went to the dragon realm through the passage between the 2 worlds on the reincarnation island. The god of the underworld might know about that matter, and your rebirth is probably exposed. Although the god of the underworld's main body is in the depths of the void, his avatar can move freely. However, his avatar projection can move around everywhere. I hope that when you go to the Heavenly Lion Star this time, you will not encounter his avatar. Chapter 3999. The Burial of Heaven's worries were not unfounded. When Ji Tianqing fought with the Heaven Punisher race and destroyed the Heaven Punisher planet, he was stopped by the clone of the god of the underworld. Fortunately, he, Yunyao, and the others were lucky enough to survive. Otherwise, they would have died in the lower realm. In Ji Tianqing and the Burial of Heaven's knowledge, the god of the underworld was definitely the most dangerous enemy. However, Ji Tianqing was not worried about this. He comforted the Burial of Heaven. Not only does the god of the underworld know that I have been reborn, he will also tell the other 4 god emperors. However, they only know that I went to the dragon realm. They should not have thought that I would grow so quickly, let alone that I entered the outer space and was about to reach the Heavenly Lion planet. Of course, even if the god of the underworld can predict the future and calculate that I will enter the Heavenly Lion planet, he cannot leave. However, his true body can't leave. At most, he can only send a projection of his avatar to kill me. From so far away, how much strength does his clone projection have left? As long as I don't encounter his true body, I will not be in danger. Since Ji Tianqing was confident, the Burial of Heaven was no longer worried about this matter. The next 10 days were calm and without any twists and turns. The Burial of Heaven's sword hurried through the void while Ji Tianqing cultivated in seclusion in the divine pagoda. On the 11th day, the burial of Heaven sword successfully arrived at the Heavenly Lion planet. There was no doubt that the Heavenly Lion planet was also a heavenly dipper star with a diameter of 4 billion miles. The surface of the huge planet was covered in golden divine light and was protected by a thick spatial barrier. The surroundings of the planet were silent. There was no sign of any gods or fleets. The entire planet was very peaceful and auspicious. There was no premonition of danger at all. Tianxia ended his seclusion and appeared in the void. He stared at the Heavenly Lion planet for a moment, then passed through the spatial barrier and entered the Heavenly Lion planet. Before he came, he had already inquired that the Heavenly Lion region Lord lived in the divine radiance grotto heaven of the Middle Sky continent. After Tianxia entered the Heavenly Lion star, he discovered that there were more than a dozen continents on this star. He could only spend 2 days to land on the nearest continent and find out where the Middle Sky continent was. This was a relatively simple question. He found a random god king of a foreign race and asked the question with some tricks. After getting the answer, he put the foreign race's god king into a coma, and he would only wake up after a month. Then he went straight to the Middle Sky continent. 5 days later, he crossed 2 continents before he found the Middle Sky continent in the depths of the vast sea. Compared with the other dozen continents, the area of this Middle Sky continent was not large. However, it was located in the middle of the Heavenly Lion star and was the place with the most divine power. It was the place where the greatest number of divine king powerhouses were gathered. The continent was surrounded by the vast ocean, and it was not connected to other continents. After Tianxia arrived on this continent, he concealed his whereabouts and aura and quietly flew towards the central part of the continent. Along the way, he saw many divine kingdoms and countless cities. Those cities all had ancient histories, but they did not appear to be dilapidated. They were still prosperous and prosperous. Millions of foreign race beings lived in each city, and there was no lack of divine lord powerhouses among them. Every divine kingdom had a divine king powerhouse overseeing it. There were close to 100 divine kings on the entire continent. Although those were all low-level divine kings and only a few middle-level divine kings. However, it was still very surprising that there were so many divine kings on a single continent. It also surprised Tianxia. After flying in the sky above the continent for a day, Tianxia arrived at the central part of the continent and arrived at the entrance of the divine radiance grotto heaven. This entrance was surrounded by boundless mountains, and it was located at the peak of a 1,000 feet tall mountain. The peak of the towering mountain was opened up into a platform with a radius of 30 miles. The ground was paved with blue stone, forming a plaza. A circle of stone pillars stood around the plaza, and they were connected to the array formation patterns on the plaza's ground, forming a huge defensive array formation. In the middle of the plaza was an altar, and it was shining with a dazzling divine light, forming a door of white light in midair. The door formed by the white light was the entrance to the divine radiance grotto heaven. There were close to 100 divine lord guards around the altar, and there were also a few divine lords standing under each of the stone pillars around the plaza. There were a total of 200 guards, and they were all clad in armor and wielding swords. The 4 guard commanders at the front were all divine king powerhouses. Among them, there were 2 low-level divine kings and 2 high-level divine kings. Tianxia remained invisible and hid in the sky to observe for a while. Seeing that the grotto heaven's entrance was so heavily guarded, he could not help but frown and think to himself, "Isn't the divine radiance grotto heaven's defensive power a little too strong? Are they usually like this? Or did they smell danger and increase the number of guards?" The 2 stellar region lords that Tianxia had come into contact with before did not have such grandeur. The defensive power of the grotto heaven's entrance was so strong that it was almost comparable to the entrances of the Dragon Emperor's grotto mansions in the Dragon Realm. This made Tianxia wonder if the Heavenly Lion region lord had sensed something. The burial of heaven also reminded him in a timely manner, "If you feel that something is wrong, then be careful." Tianxia obviously knew this, so he stayed in the sky and observed patiently. He was not in a hurry to sneak into the divine radiance grotto heaven. He had time and patience. If the Heavenly Lion region lord really sensed something, he would definitely reveal something. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Time passed quietly. Tianxia observed for a whole 7 days. The number of guards in the plaza did not change, and even their positions did not change. In these 7 days, There would occasionally be some divine lord powerhouses entering and leaving, their expressions hurried and serious. Ji Tianxing could tell that those divine lords were probably messengers, responsible for conveying orders and messages. Other than that, there were also two divine king powerhouses entering and exiting. They were probably kings of some divine kingdoms who had entered the divine radiance grotto heaven to handle matters. All in all, everything seemed normal. Ji Tianxing gradually relaxed his vigilance and thought to himself, just the middle sky continent alone has over 100 divine king powerhouses. This heavenly lion planet is abnormally prosperous and there are many powerhouses. From the looks of it, it should be normal for the divine radiance grotto heaven's entrance to be strong. Therefore he planned to sneak into the divine radiance grotto heaven to investigate. The method was the same as before. He transformed into a speck of dust and quietly attached himself to a powerhouse's body. On the afternoon of the 8th day, a divine lord powerhouse flew over from afar and landed on the plaza. He looked a little anxious as if he wanted to report some news. However, the guards at the entrance still routinely checked his identity token and interrogated him about his origins and intentions. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing, who had transformed into a speck of dust, quietly attached himself to this person's body. A moment later, this divine lord was allowed to pass and hurriedly flew into the white light door in midair. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, Ji Tianxing also followed this person into the divine radiance grotto heaven. Compared to the outside world, this grotto heaven's divine power was denser. The mountains and rivers were beautiful and the scenery was pleasant. Although there was still a gap when compared to the various grotto heavens in the dragon realm. However, in the starry sky outside the realm, this grotto heaven was indeed a cultivation treasure land. Chapter 4000. The divine brilliance grotto heaven was very big. It had a radius of 500,000 miles. After the messenger entered the grotto heaven, he flew for 200,000 miles before arriving at the palaces in the depths of the mountains. Nearly 1,000 palaces and buildings stood on dozens of mountain peaks, occupying a radius of 1,000 miles. There were at least 50,000 foreign race experts living in the 1,000 palaces and buildings. Among these 50,000 people, most of them were guards and servants in the Divine Lord realm. There were only 50 or so Divine King realm experts. However, these Divine Kings were of higher quality. Most of them were middle-level Divine Kings. As far as the eye could see, the entire palaces were peaceful and peaceful. Under the solemn atmosphere there was a busy atmosphere. Dozens of guards could be clearly seen patrolling the palace complex. Outside the gates of each palace, at each mountain peak and at the passageways, there were a large number of guards guarding. Ji Tianxing followed the messenger Divine Lord into the palaces and landed outside an inconspicuous palace. There were hundreds of guards in the palace. The leader was a middle-level Divine King. Ji Tianxing knew that the middle-level Divine King was the guard commander. The messenger Divine Lord he possessed wanted to report the news to the commander. He was not interested in this. His target was not the guard commander, but the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. Therefore he quietly left the messenger Divine Lord and wandered in the sky alone. Although he said he was wandering, he was actually secretly releasing his divine consciousness to investigate the layout and defense of the palaces. At the same time he was also searching for the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. His goal was simple. He wanted to secretly find the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, capture him and interrogate him for some information. If he could act secretly without alerting the tens of thousands of guards and dozens of divine kings, that would be the best. Ji Tianxing wandered in the palaces for an hour and had a basic understanding of the defense situation within a radius of 1,000 miles. At the same time he also saw that the area was protected by 3 layers of defense formations. Although the 3 layers of defense formations were all high-grade king-level divine formations. When the 3 layers of defense formations were activated, their power was very close to that of a supreme-grade king-level divine formation. However, this was not a threat to Ji Tianxing. He was using his divine sense to search for traces of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord when he suddenly discovered a figure flashing by outside a palace on a mountain peak. Originally, Ji Tianxing did not care about it. He only cared about searching for the Heavenly Lion Region Lord who was hiding somewhere. However, he suddenly came back to his senses and felt that the figure that flashed by just now was inexplicably familiar. Thus, his divine sense immediately gathered on that figure. Only now did he see clearly that it was a handsome and valiant young man who was over 3 m tall and wore golden armor. The young man looked to be in his 30s. He was neither a human nor an alien race from the outer realm, nor was he a dragon or a god. Instead, it was the heaven punishers who should have disappeared. Ji Tianxing immediately perked up. He stared at the young man and observed him carefully. Then he recognized him as the young master of the heaven punisher race, Tianshu. The moment he saw the heavenly book, his memory instantly returned to 100 years ago. At that time he had used all of his strength to attack planet Heaven Fa, wanting to completely destroy it. It was Empress Zhou Xian who had brought Tianshu and fought fiercely against him. Although he had defeated Zhou Xian and Tianshu, causing planet Heaven Fa to suffer heavy losses. However, just as planet Heaven Fa was about to be destroyed, the avatar projection of the god of the underworld opened a passage between the two worlds and descended into the mortal realm. After that, the god of the underworld saved planet Heaven Fa and chased after Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing had almost died. Yun Yao, Jiku, and the others were also killed by the god of the underworld. After the battle, the god of the underworld wanted to bring Tianshu and Ji Wuhan back to the upper realm. It was the sacred dragon emperor who had acted in time and saved Ji Wuhan. As for Tianshu, he was naturally brought to the upper realm by the god of the underworld. That year, too many things had happened in that battle. Ji Tianxing and the others had suffered heavy losses. As a result, he had neglected Tianshu, who had been taken away by the god of the underworld. Today he actually saw Tianshu again in the divine radiance grotto heaven. What was even more unbelievable was that Tianshu actually had the strength of a 7th-level divine lord and had become an upper-level divine lord. Ji Tianxing was filled with shock. He thought to himself, could it be that the god of the underworld has taken Tianshu as his disciple? If not for the god of the underworld's personal guidance, how could Tianshu become an upper-level divine lord so quickly with his talent and potential? In comparison, Ji Wuhan's talent and potential were several levels higher than Tianshu's. He was a first-rate genius in the world. However, until today Ji Wuhan was only a middle-level divine lord. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing was even more certain that the god of the underworld had definitely taken Tianshu as his disciple. Otherwise, Tianshu would not have such strength and would not have appeared in the divine radiance grotto heaven. It was even more impossible for him to have such a noble status. Even if several divine king powerhouses encountered Tianshu, they would have to bow and salute respectfully. Back then the god of the underworld made a move and let you survive by a fluke. Seeing you again today, you absolutely can't be left alive. Ji Tianxing stared at Tianshu's figure and secretly made up his mind. His divine sense detected that Tianshu seemed to be in a very good mood and was hurrying to a certain mountain peak in the middle. He had a wide smile on his face and his expression was filled with anticipation. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing also quietly hurried to that mountain peak and secretly pondered, who is Tianshu going to meet? Why is he so happy and filled with anticipation? Very soon, Tianshu landed outside an ordinary divine palace. When the guards guarding the divine palace saw him, they bowed and invited him in. Ji Tianxing hurriedly followed and quietly sneaked into the divine palace, following Tianshu into the depths of the divine palace. Before long, Tianshu arrived outside a certain secret chamber underground of the divine palace. This secret chamber looked inconspicuous, but in fact, it was carefully built and protected by layers of divine arrays. If Ji Tianxing did not observe it closely, he would easily miss it, let alone the person in the secret chamber. At this moment, Tianshu bowed to the door of the secret chamber and said, "Master, Tianshu is here on orders to meet you." There was no sound in the secret chamber. After a few breaths of time, the door of the secret chamber opened. An old voice came from the secret room. It sounded amiable as it said, "Tianshu, come in and talk." Tianshu nodded with a smile and hurriedly stepped into the secret chamber. Ji Tianxing, who was invisible, had already entered the secret chamber before Tianshu and sized up the situation in the secret chamber. In the secret chamber that was surrounded by divine light, there was only a foreign race elder who looked like a dead tree sitting on an altar. The elder in a black robe had a sinister face and exuded the aura of a divine king expert. Ji Tianxing could tell at a glance that the elder was a mid-stage 9th heaven divine king expert. He was the master of the heavenly lion region. However, he was not in a hurry to make a move. He also wanted to hear what Tianshu and the Master of the Heavenly Lion region had to say. After Tianshu bowed to the Master of the Heavenly Lion region, he could not wait to ask, "Master, I have been cultivating in seclusion and successfully broke through to the 7th Heaven Divine Lord realm yesterday. After coming out of seclusion, I heard from the guard commander that you have summoned me because you have good news to tell me." The Master of the Heavenly Lion region nodded slightly and tried to squeeze out a kind smile on his sinister face. He said, "That's right. Your master is coming to the Heavenly Lion Star." Chapter 4001. Suddenly hearing this news, Tianshu was stunned. Even Ji Tianxing was stunned for a moment, his eyes flashing with astonishment. Of course, he knew that the Lord Supreme Master that the Heavenly Lion region Lord mentioned was the Netherworld Divine Emperor. At this moment several questions popped up in his mind. Why would the god of the underworld suddenly come to the Heavenly Lion Star for no reason? Did the god of the underworld come in person or in an avatar? Shouldn't his original body stay in the depths of the void to study the mystery of the gray fog? Has my whereabouts been exposed and been speculated by the god of the underworld? At this time, Tianshu finally came back to his senses, revealing a face full of surprise. He shouted excitedly, "Is it true? Master's coming back to see me? Great. Although in the past 100 years, Master has sent me messages and given me advice several times. But he only came back to see me once, and that was 80 years ago. When Master returns and sees that I have become a superior divine lord, he will be very pleased." Although Tianshu had lived on the Heavenly Lion Star for nearly 100 years and had long been integrated into this world. But he had no one to rely on, and his only backer was the god of the underworld. He regarded the god of the underworld as his master and father. Naturally, he wanted to see the god of the underworld often. But he also knew that the god of the underworld was carrying out an earth-shattering plan and could not leave. Just like 80 years ago, the god of the underworld came to visit him on the Heavenly Lion Star. But it was only an avatar. Thinking of this, Tianshu could not help but ask, "My lord, did Master come in person, or did he come in an avatar like last time?" The Heavenly Lion region lord stroked his goatee and smiled. "Of course he came in an avatar. How could the Lord Supreme's original body appear? Not to mention you, even I have never seen the Lord Supreme's original body." Hearing that the god of the underworld had come in an avatar again, Tianshu could not help but feel a little disappointed and regretful. The Heavenly Lion region lord saw the change in his mood and comforted him with a smile. "Tianshu, the Lord Supreme is so busy that he can't appear in person. When the Supreme Martial Artist returns, you must perform well." Tianshu quickly nodded to express his understanding and asked, "Sir Domain Lord, the Heavenly Lion Star field has been quiet recently, nothing major has happened and we have paid the tribute on time. Why would Master return at this time? It shouldn't be just to see me, right?" It had to be said that Tianshu was not stupid and knew his place. Even though he was the last disciple of the god of the underworld, he admitted that he wasn't that important in the eyes of the god of the underworld. The Heavenly Lion region lord stroked his beard and said with a smile, "No wonder you can gain the favor of Lord Sovereign. Not only is your talent outstanding, but you are also very intelligent." That's right. Lord Supreme had returned this time to deal with a formidable opponent. Although the Lord Supreme Martial Artist did not specify who that person was in the message. However, that person had already entered the Heavenly Lion Star region. It was very likely that he would come to the Heavenly Lion Star to start a massacre. Lord Supreme Martial Artist told us to be careful, but we can't reveal any flaws and alert that person. Hearing this, Tianshu frowned and asked, "Master is already one of the strongest masters in the world. Who is qualified to be his opponent? By the way, where's Master now? When will he arrive at the Heavenly Lion Star?" The Heavenly Lion region lord shook his head and said with a wry smile, "Lord Supreme Martial Artist has always been mysterious. It is not our place to ask how he does things. But since Lord Supreme Martial Artist sent a message 2 or 3 months ago, he should be arriving at the Heavenly Lion Star soon." "Oh, that's good." Tianshu was relieved and took the initiative to suggest, "Sir Domain Lord, I will pass the order to the guards to be on guard." "No need." The Heavenly Lion region lord waved his hand and said with a smile, "I have already arranged everything, you don't need to worry. You just need to stay in the divine palace and wait patiently for Lord Supreme Martial Artist to return. Tianshu's eyes were a little dim, but he nodded expressionlessly and said, "Yes, sir." In fact, he knew in his heart that he was just a superior divine lord and was not much stronger than those guards. Even if Master's strong enemy came, he could only be cannon fodder and would not be of much use. The reason why he could become a general and have such a high status was because of Master. In short, Master and the region lord had arranged everything, he just needed to watch. In that case, I will take my leave. The two chatted for a while more before Tianshu bowed and left the secret room. Ji Tianxing also left the secret room and secretly followed Tianshu out of the divine palace. I didn't expect that the burial of heaven was right. The god of the underworld guessed that I would come to the heavenly lion star and sent an incarnation, and even asked the heavenly lion region lord to be on guard. No wonder the defensive power of the grotto heaven's entrance is not weak. After listening to the conversation between the region lord and Tianshu, Ji Tianxing understood everything. However, he could not figure out how the god of the underworld knew his whereabouts. Can a god emperor really use the power of the heavenly Tao to deduce and predict the future? Was it the god of the underworld who deduced this result, or was it the Nine Suns god emperor who reminded him? If it was the Nine Suns god emperor who reminded him, that means the Nine Suns god emperor has already analyzed that I killed god King Chongfeng and the heavenly sun region lord. These god emperors really can't be underestimated, each more scheming than the other. Through these few matters, Ji Tianxing could be considered to have an indirect contact and contest with the two god emperors. Only then did he realize that the two god emperors were not only powerful and resourceful, but also more scheming than before. As for his future revenge plan, he felt even more pressure. A quarter of an hour later, Tianshu returned to the divine palace where he lived. He was a proud and conceited person. Although the region lord of the heavenly lion region spoke in a way that did not embarrass him. However, he still felt that he was being looked down upon and was very unhappy. He returned to his residence unhappily, ignored the guards and servants and went straight into the secret chamber. Sitting cross-legged in the secret chamber, he did not cultivate. Instead, he muttered to himself, "Even if I am a top genius and become a high-level divine lord in 100 years, so what? In the heavenly lion star and the entire star region, high-level divine lords are cannon fodder, insignificant existences. Only when one becomes a divine king can one be called a powerhouse and be valued and respected by others. This time, when Master returns, I must ask for a divine king cultivation technique and strive to become a divine king in 30 years. In the future, when I reach the 9th level of the divine king realm, I can replace the old region lord and control the heavenly lion star region. At that time, I will be valued by Master and become his trusted disciple." At this point, Tianshu secretly clenched his fists, his determined eyes revealing the flames of ambition. However, a low and icy cold voice shattered his fantasy and longing. "No, you don't have a chance." Tianshu was shocked and immediately tensed up. He subconsciously took out his divine knife and looked around vigilantly. Who is speaking? Chapter 4002. The secret chamber where Tianshu cultivated in seclusion was, of course, heavily guarded. He had never thought that someone would be able to sneak in without him knowing. Moreover, the cold male voice was so unfamiliar. Tianshu was not only nervous, but his heart was also in his mouth. At this moment, a white light flashed on the ground 30 feet in front of him. A human youth with black hair and black eyes wearing a white robe appeared out of thin air. This person was Ji Tianxing. He did not reveal the appearance of Long Tian, the Dragon Clan's youth, but his true appearance. His hands were empty as he looked at Tianshu calmly. His face was cold and there was a cold smile on his lips. Tianshu glared at him fiercely. When he saw his face clearly, he was obviously stunned. His first impression was that this white-robed youth was somewhat familiar and dangerous. Then he searched his vast sea of memories for clues related to this white-robed youth. Then his memories were pulled back to a battle 100 years ago when the Heaven Destroyer star was almost destroyed. All kinds of tragic scenes of blood and fire flashed through his mind. He instantly recovered from his shock and understood the white-robed youth's identity. "It's you. You're that damn Ji who slaughtered my people?" Tianxing. Tianshu gripped his divine saber tightly and glared at Ji Tianxing with bloodshot eyes. His entire body was filled with anger and killing intent. Ji Tianxing sneered. I didn't expect you to still remember me after 100 years. Endless anger and killing intent filled his chest. Tian Shu's angry face was distorted. He gritted his teeth and growled, Ji Tianxing. You bastard who deserves to be cut into pieces. Executioner. You heavily injured the Heaven Destroyer star, killed 10 billion of my people and even killed my mother. This is a blood feud that is absolutely irreconcilable. How could I possibly forget it? Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, Who told you that I killed your mother, Yun Xuan? It must be the god of the underworld, right? Tian Shu was taken aback. Isn't that the case? Hee hee. Ji Tianxing laughed contemptuously and said, I didn't kill Yun Xuan. She was forced to her death by the god of the underworld. Back then the passageway between the two worlds had shrunk, and the god of the underworld was unable to support it. He had Yun Xuan sacrifice herself to support the passageway between the two worlds. Only then can the god of the underworld take you away from the mortal world and return to the upper realm. Unfortunately, you fainted long ago and didn't see that scene. Bullsh *T. Sky Pivot yelled at the top of his lungs, refusing to accept the answer. Honorable Master possesses remarkable powers. How could he not return to the upper realm? You are the one who killed my mother. Don't try to explain yourself. Ji Tianxing looked at him sympathetically. He shook his head and said, Tisk. Seems like you have a lot of trust in the god of the underworld. The god of the underworld used the heaven punishers to kill your mother. Yet you took him as your master and even saw him as your father. This is probably what it means to recognize a thief as your father, right? Shut up. Sky Pivot roared angrily. He stood up and pointed his blade at Ji Tianxing. He growled, No matter how my mother died, it was all because of you. I will return this debt to you 10-fold, no 100-fold. Ji Tianxing still had a smile on his face. He said, Although you pretended to be angry and crazy, roaring with all your might, and even releasing your divine power to alert the guards outside, I'm afraid that I won't let my guard down. Let me tell you, it's useless. I've already sealed the secret room. No one will be able to find out what's going on here. Sky Pivot, who had been on the verge of going berserk, instantly calmed down. Deep fear flashed through his eyes. After experiencing so many setbacks and tribulations, he was no longer the hothead who could be easily angered. He knew that Ji Tianxing was definitely a god king if he could sneak into the secret room. Therefore he had been putting on an act just now to attract the guards. But he didn't expect that Ji Tianxing had already sealed the secret room. Since his little trick failed, he could only calm down and think of a way to deal with it. At this time Ji Tianxing continued, By the way, you were brought here by the god of the underworld. You must not know what happened to the Heaven Destroyer star, right? Sky Pivot frowned and said in a cold voice, I remember that you and your companions were all killed by my master. How are you still alive? Ji Tianxing smiled and said, I can't tell you this. I can only say that the heavens help the worthy. I'm not fated to die. After the god of the underworld brought you to the immortal realm, I spent a few decades recuperating. At that time, the Heaven Destroyer star's vitality was greatly damaged. Without a leader, it fell into chaos. So, I used the same trick again and completely destroyed the Heaven Destroyer star. This time no one can stop me. The Heaven Destroyer star no longer exists. Hearing this news, Sky Pivot's eyes instantly became bloodshot and turned dark red. Blood-red flames also rose from his body and his body began to tremble. This time it was not an act. He was really angry. He didn't doubt that Ji Tianxing was deliberately angering him. Because he knew that Ji Tianxing was still alive and had become a God King powerhouse. The Heaven Destroyer star must have been destroyed. Sky Pivot was unable to restrain his anger and was on the verge of going berserk. But reason told him that he was not Ji Tianxing's opponent. He must find a way to save himself. So he decided to stall for time. Ji Tianxing, after you ascended, you should be in the divine world. How did you come to the Heavenly Lion Star region? Also, did you come to the Heavenly Lion Star region to seek revenge? How do you know that I am not in the divine world but in the Heavenly Lion Star region? If Ji Tianxing answered these questions, he would have to tell a long story. In this way, Sky Pivot could successfully stall for time. But he miscalculated. Ji Tianxing had already seen through his thoughts. You want to stall for time? Stop dreaming. No one can save you. If it wasn't for the god of the underworld, you would have been dead. And today he won't be able to make it back. Ji Tianxing sneered and walked toward Sky Pivot step by step. Every time he took a step forward, the pressure emitted from his body would double. When he took a step, Sky Pivot was enveloped by an invisible pressure. With a plop, he knelt on the ground and the divine saber in his hand fell to the ground. When he took a second step, Sky Pivot's armor and protective divine light collapsed, and his body began to distort. When Ji Tianxing took a third step, Sky Pivot could not even make a sound. His body collapsed and exploded into a rain of blood. Boom! With a muffled sound, Sky Pivot's body was destroyed. Dark red blood splattered all over the ground. Even his godhead collapsed into a dozen pieces and scattered on the ground. Ji Tianxing did not use any weapon, nor did he use any divine ability. He only used the invisible pressure of a powerhouse to kill Sky Pivot. This was absolute power, absolute suppression. The gap between the two was like the moon in the sky and an ant in the ground. After easily killing Sky Pivot, Ji Tianxing dispersed his pressure and divine power and returned to being invisible. He quietly left the secret room without alerting anyone and quickly rushed to the secret room where the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was. Chapter 4003. If the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was not alert, he should still be in the secret chamber at this moment. Ji Tianxing went to kill Tianshu and only delayed about 15 minutes. He thought that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord should not have reacted yet. After all, when he killed Tianshu, no one was alarmed. But after 100 breaths of time, when he arrived outside the secret chamber, he frowned, his eyes somewhat gloomy. Because his divine sense passed through the door of the secret chamber and sensed that the aura inside was somewhat strange. The aura of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord seemed to have disappeared. This was not a good thing. Ji Tianxing hurriedly cast a spell to crack the divine array of the secret chamber's door and decided to break in to see what was going on. As for the 4 guards guarding the door of the secret chamber, they were naturally knocked out by him using a divine ability secret art. In a short while, Ji Tianxing cracked the array of the secret chamber's stone door and opened the stone door. Creak, creak, creak. As soon as the stone door opened a crack, Ji Tianxing stepped inside. His divine sense enveloped the entire secret chamber, searching for traces of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. However, the situation was as he expected. The secret chamber was empty, and the Heavenly Lion Region Lord had long disappeared. This result undoubtedly confirmed that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord had sensed that something was wrong and hid. Confirming that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was not in the secret chamber, Ji Tianxing immediately left the secret chamber and flew out of the divine palace. At the same time, he released an invisible divine sense and spread out in all directions, searching for the whereabouts of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. At this time, a loud bugle horn suddenly sounded around the divine palace. Thousands of divine Lord Realm guards emerged from the palaces in all directions and quickly gathered in the sky. Immediately after, bugle horns sounded from various mountain peaks in the distance, waking up countless guards. The rapid and powerful bugle horn indicated that a strong enemy was attacking. Therefore, in a short period of time, the thousands of guards guarding the various palaces and passageways had completed their assembly. Later, more than 10,000 guards flew into the sky, forming a 1,000-mile encirclement, surrounding the entire palace complex. The divine palace where Ji Tianxing was located was heavily surrounded and was in the center of the encirclement. The first layer of encirclement had nearly 1,000 guards, the second layer of encirclement had 5,000 guards. As for the third layer of encirclement, there were more than 10,000 guards surrounding the entire palace complex. As for the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, he was standing in the sky above the divine palace with over 20 divine king experts looking down. Ji Tianxing was in an invisible state and would not be discovered by the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. However, the Region Lord of the Heavenly Lion Region had his hands behind his back. With a confident posture, he shouted in a dignified tone, "Don't hide anymore. I have already seen through your whereabouts. Show yourself obediently." On the surface, it seemed that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord had seen through Ji Tianxing's disguise by shouting at the divine palace beneath his feet. But in reality, the Sky Lion Region Lord's eyes were unfocused and somewhat empty. Ji Tianxing naturally knew that this was the Heavenly Lion Region Lord bluffing, deliberately luring him to appear. Under normal circumstances he should not show himself now. He should wait for the Heavenly Lion Region Master to lose his cool and then try to escape from the encirclement. However, in Ji Tianxing's opinion, with just these 20,000 guards and dozens of divine kings, it was impossible to stop him from capturing the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. Moreover, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was already on guard. If he did not show himself, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord might escape. Most importantly, the clone of the god of the underworld had set off for the Heavenly Lion Star as early as 3 months ago. The longer he delayed, the more dangerous it would be. To Ji Tianxing, the only one who could truly be considered dangerous was the clone of the god of the underworld. Therefore Ji Tianxing no longer hid and showed himself openly. Swoosh! In a flash of white light, he flew to the top of the divine palace and stood 1,000 feet away from the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, revealing himself. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the 20 divine kings immediately tensed up and stared at him vigilantly. Before Ji Tianxing could speak, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord said with a smile, "You thought that you had entered the divine radiance grotto heaven without anyone noticing. You didn't expect that I had been waiting for you for a long time." At this moment, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord appeared quite confident, as if victory was in his grasp. Originally, the divine kings and guards were still a little nervous. Infected by the Heavenly Lion Region Lord's aura, they also regained their confidence and calmness. Ji Tianxing looked at the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and said with an indifferent expression, "Don't flatter yourself. If the god of the underworld had not sent you a message, how would you know? Alright, did the god of the underworld tell you who I am? Do you know where I came from, why I came, and what realm I am in?" Obviously, the god of the underworld did not tell the Heavenly Lion Region Lord these things. Firstly, he did not want to explain too much to his subordinates. Secondly, he was afraid that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord would be timid and make a fool of himself. If the Heavenly Lion Region Lord knew that a peak divine king was about to sneak into the Heavenly Lion Star to assassinate him, who knew how scared he would be? Hearing Ji Tianxing's question, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was stunned for a moment and could not answer. He had already seen that Ji Tianxing's strength was unfathomable. His aura was very mysterious and reserved. His realm was definitely higher than his. He was a 9th-level divine king, then Ji Tianxing must be a peak divine king. At the thought of this, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord's heart also jumped, and his confidence disappeared by more than half. However, he did not dare to show his timidity and guilt. He still maintained a confident posture and sneered, "I don't need to know this. I only need to know that you have walked into a trap and will die without a doubt. No matter who you are, no matter what kind of strength you have, you are all alone. And under my command, there are dozens of divine kings and tens of thousands of divine Lord Realm guards. Even if you have great ability, today you will be smashed to pieces and buried here." Ji Tianxing saw that he was fierce in appearance and said with a sneer, "Since you are so confident, what are you waiting for?" The Heavenly Lion Region Lord was not stupid. He naturally knew that the longer the time was delayed, the more advantageous it was for him. If they fought with Ji Tianxing now, even if they were destined to win, they would have to pay a terrible price. A peak divine king killing close to 10,000 guards and 20 to 30 divine kings on the spot in a life-and-death battle was still no problem. However, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was not willing to bear such tragic consequences. Therefore he chose to continue delaying time. Although you alone can't fight so many elite guards of this seat, victory is destined to belong to us. But you are a cornered beast, and your counterattack at the brink of death will still make us pay a considerable price. This seat is a good region lord who loves the people like children. I have always taken pity on the lives of the soldiers under my command. Therefore this seat still hopes that you have self-awareness and can take the initiative to admit defeat and surrender. This seat will give you a dignified death. This is good for everyone." The Heavenly Lion Region Lord looked at Ji Tianxing with an indifferent expression and said these words that inspired reverence for righteousness. Those 20 over divine kings and 20,000 guards were actually somewhat moved and grateful to his words. But Ji Tianxing revealed a disdainful smile. "Want to delay time? Dream on." Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 4004. The Sky Lion Region Master wanted to stall for time until the god of the underworld returned. However, Ji Tianxing could not let this happen. He had to end the battle quickly. After shouting coldly, he made the first move. He opened the Jutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and opened a space tunnel. Yun Yao, Jiku, Chao Qingyu, and the others who were ready for battle flew out one by one. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Divine light flickered, and 11 godly kings appeared behind Ji Tianxing. Yun Yao, Jiku, Ji Wushuang, Chao Qingyu, Yang Lon, Baifeng, Shui Huan, Lin Shui, and the others all appeared. Even Black Dragon and Qian Yu appeared. Although they had all suffered light or heavy injuries the last time they fought, they were still able to fight back. However, during the few months that the Sword of Burial of Heaven traveled, they had been in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for many years to recuperate. Their injuries had long healed. The repeated life and death battles had benefited everyone greatly, and their strength had increased rapidly. Therefore, when everyone knew that Ji Tianxing had entered the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven, they took the initiative to request to participate in the battle. Of course, Ji Tianxing would not reject everyone's request. Seeing the sudden appearance of 11 godly kings, the Sky Lion Region Master, more than 20 godly kings, and close to 1,000 guards around them all revealed intense fear. I knew that things would not be so simple. Even if this guy is a peak godly king, how could he act alone? The Sky Lion Region Master's face was gloomy as he gritted his teeth and muttered. More than 20 godly kings also gripped their divine weapons tightly. Boundless divine power was accumulated in their bodies and they were ready to attack. The hearts of the 1,000 godly lords also sped up. They were filled with fear and worry. At this moment, Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others had already discussed the battle strategy through voice transmission. Without needing anyone to give the order, Ji Tianxing took the lead and swung his sword at the Sky Lion Region Master and the others. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Baifeng, and the others immediately attacked as well. They used all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills to attack the surrounding guards. An intense battle instantly broke out. 10 directional vanishing shadows. Ji Tianxing's body flickered with white light, and 9 doppelgangers instantly appeared. Including his original body, a total of 10 people charged towards the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the 20-odd God Kings behind him. The strategy that he had discussed with Yun Yao and the others was that he would deal with the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and those God Kings. Their goal was to get rid of the several thousand guards in the surroundings and the 10,000 guards in the outermost circle. Seeing Ji Tianxing rushing over alone, although the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was worried, he did not panic. After all, he was confident that he could defeat Ji Tianxing if he teamed up with more than 20 God Kings. However, he saw that Ji Tianxing had actually created 9 clones. Moreover, each of the clones had the strength of a peak divine king. This was equivalent to 10 peak divine kings going against him and over 20 divine generals. This was too much. In an instant, the hearts of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the other God Kings were in their throats, and they were filled with fear. Heavenly Dragon Palm, 7-Star Sword, Broken Moon Sword, Burial of Heaven Sword, Daylight Sword, Heavenly Dragon / Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers used different divine abilities and ultimate skills at the same time. They unleashed a sky full of fist radiance, palm shadows, and countless sword beams. A violent aura that could destroy heaven and earth instantly enveloped the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the others. They did not have time to dodge or escape, so they could only fight with all their might. They used their trump cards and ultimate skills to resist with all their might. Bam, 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 boom, boom. Hundreds of divine abilities and ultimate skills collided in the sky, creating a deafening explosion and blooming with dazzling divine light. A violent shockwave swept out in all directions, carrying countless fragments of divine light. It was like a shocking flood. The deafening explosion reverberated between heaven and earth. In just one exchange, the divine abilities used by the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and over 20 God Kings were defeated by Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers. The shock wave from the collision of divine abilities blasted the 1,000-foot mountain peak under everyone's feet into a pile of yellow soil, and dust filled the air. More than a dozen palaces and mansions on the mountain peak were also reduced to rubble and powder. Even the nearby mountain peaks were affected and collapsed on the spot. Fortunately, within a 1,000-mile radius, every mountain peak had a powerful defensive divine array. Otherwise, the shock wave from the battle between the two sides would not be as simple as destroying a few mountain peaks. One exchange would probably destroy everything within a 1,000-mile radius. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord and over 20 middle and upper god kings were repelled by Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers. All of them were pale. Before they could accumulate divine power and launch a counterattack, Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers launched another fierce attack. Galaxy Break. Space-Time Blade. Starry Skyfall. Raging flames burn the sky. The 10 Ji Tianxing attacked at the same time, using all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills to besiege the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and over 20 god kings. In an instant, a few god kings were hit. Their divine light shields and armor were destroyed by the sword shadows, and their bodies were cut into several pieces. Shrill screams erupted one after another. Dark red and dark golden blood splattered and scattered across the sky. In the second exchange, 6 god kings died on the spot. Not even their bones were left. The 9 god kings were severely injured. Their bodies were drenched in blood and they looked miserable. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord began to panic. He no longer led the charge. He shouted that he would charge bravely, but in fact he was hiding behind the many god kings. Of course, his most trusted divine generals were still shouting loudly, asking the many god kings to protect the region lord. Without a doubt, the actions of these divine generals had won the approval and admiration of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. Very quickly the third battle began. The 10 Ji Tianxing were still as fast as lightning, fierce and domineering. The divine abilities and ultimate skills they used were still unparalleled. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the dozen god kings, whose morale had plummeted, were no match for him at all. After a series of earth-shattering explosions, a few more god kings were killed on the spot. All the god kings, including the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, were severely injured. Their strength began to weaken. In fact, the number of people on both sides was even. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord was completely flustered. He no longer ordered the 9 god kings to charge. Instead, he let the 9 god kings cover him and escape from the battlefield first before making further plans. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing and the 9 clones surrounded them, leaving them with nowhere to run. Helpless, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord could only order the god kings guarding the various divine palaces to come and help. After all, there were more than 50 god kings in the divine splendor grotto heaven. Among them, 30 god kings were hiding in the various divine palaces, guarding the various treasure vaults and secret places. In the beginning, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord did not expect Ji Tianxing to be so powerful, so he did not summon the god kings. He thought that he and the 20 god kings would be able to deal with the powerful enemy. But now it seemed that if the 30 god kings did not come to help, he would probably die here. As the Heavenly Lion Region Lord shouted, 30 rays of divine light flew out from the mountain peaks and palaces in all directions. The 30 mid and high god kings all rushed to the center of the battlefield to rescue the injured Heavenly Lion Region Lord. Chapter 4005. While Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers were attacking the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the others, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others were also quickly killing the thousands of guards around them. Yun Yao held 2 swords in her hands as her white robe fluttered in the wind. She used all kinds of divine powers and sword techniques. There was an indescribable sense of elegance, spirituality, and holiness. Ji Ku held the Inferno Divine Spear in his hand as his body was surrounded by 5-colored divine flames. He was like a phoenix that had descended and burned all his enemies. Bai Feng, Chao Qingyu, Yang, and the others also used their own unique skills to kill the foreign guards expressionlessly. Qian Yu and the Black Dragon were weaker, but they were the largest and the commotion they caused was also the largest. They soared in the sky and released ice blades and frost swords that covered the sky. They turned the area within 1,000 miles into a sea of fire that was surrounded by divine light. In just a few minutes, the thousands of divine lord guards were killed by Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others. At this moment, 30 foreign race divine kings rushed over from all directions to rescue the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. 7 of the 9 divine kings that were guarding the Heavenly Lion Region Lord had been killed by Ji Tianxing. Only 2 of them were left. He watched as the 30 god kings charged towards Ji Tianxing and his 9 avatars without any regard for their own safety. Under the protection of the 2 divine kings, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was prepared to escape the battlefield and fly into the distance. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others immediately wanted to stop the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. This was because they knew that Ji Tianxing's target was the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. They could not let him escape. However, Ji Tianxing sent a voice transmission in time and said to everyone, "Don't worry. I will take care of him. You guys be careful of the 5,000 guards." As expected, the 5,000 guards in the second layer of encirclement also received the order from the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. They roared and shouted as they charged into the battlefield without any regard for their own safety. They surrounded Ji Tianxing, Yunyao and the others. There was only one purpose. That was to stall Ji Tianxing, Yunyao and the others, giving the Heavenly Lion Region Lord the opportunity and time to escape. As for letting the 5,000 guards kill Ji Tianxing and the others, the Region Lord of the Heavenly Lion Region didn't even think about it. Rumble. Bang 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 bang. Soon the 5,000 guards and Yunyao's group began to fight, creating earth-shattering noises. The area within a radius of 1,000 miles was in chaos, completely flooded by divine light and flames. Mountain peaks collapsed one after another, turning into piles of scorched earth. After this battle, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord's cave residence and palace complex were completely destroyed. However, the most important thing right now was not the destruction of the palace, but rather, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, who had just seen a glimmer of hope for survival, fell into despair in the blink of an eye. The 30 foreign race god kings held back Ji Tianxing and his 9 clones. Under the protection of 2 god kings, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord successfully escaped from the battlefield. He escaped 1,000 miles away and flew out of the encirclement formed by more than 10,000 guards. He turned to look at the middle of the battlefield and saw that many Ji Tianxing were still fighting with the foreign race god kings. He heaved a long sigh of relief. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, and he even felt as if he had escaped from death. As long as they can delay for a few hours, maybe Lord Supreme will come back. This thought flashed through the Heavenly Lion Region Lord's mind, with a strong sense of hope and anticipation. However, just as this thought flashed through his mind, his vision blurred, and he saw a golden light flash in front of him, and a figure appeared out of thin air. A handsome and valiant young man from the Dragon Clan clad in golden armor. Moreover, this was not a clone but a real body. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord trembled and his nerves instantly tensed up. He never thought that Ji Tianxing could easily escape from the encirclement of 30 god kings and teleport in front of him. This was too terrifying. In his panic, his first reaction was to turn around and run. However, Ji Tianxing had already released an invisible pressure, sealing off a radius of 10,000 miles. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the 2 god kings beside him were suppressed to the point that their faces were pale and they could not move. The 3 of them desperately wanted to escape, but their movements were extremely slow and their bodies were extremely stiff. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing raised his right hand and used the heaven-capturing dragon claw to capture the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord's eyes were bloodshot as he roared angrily. The 2 injured god kings no longer turned around to escape. Instead, they pounced on Ji Tianxing without any regard for their own safety. They knew that they were powerless to stop Ji Tianxing, so they self-destructed. They wanted to use their lives to stop Ji Tianxing and stall for time for the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. Seeing that the 2 god kings' bodies were ignited with blood flames, their bodies swayed violently, and their divine sparks also erupted with violent power. They were like violently inflated balloons that could explode at any time. Although Ji Tianxing was not afraid of the self-destruction of the 2 god kings, his life would not be in danger. But a few hundred miles away, Yunyao, Jiku, Ji Wushuang and the rest were still fighting with thousands of guards. The self-destruction of 2 8th-stage realm god kings would definitely destroy a radius of 10,000 miles. If Yunyao, Jiku and the rest were affected, half of them would die and the other half would be severely injured. Ji Tianxing had no choice but to use the heaven-capturing dragon claw to grab the 2 god kings. Before the 2 god kings could self-destruct, he unleashed a terrifying power and forcefully crushed the 2 of them. Boom! In the crisp sound of the explosion, the 2 god kings were crushed into pieces and blood splattered everywhere. Even their divine sparks were crushed on the spot and scattered in the huge golden dragon claw. The 2 god kings were dead and the crisis was resolved. Ji Tianxing kept their divine sparks and chased after the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, who was desperately escaping. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord, driven by his desire to live, had already exploded with all his potential and teleported continuously high in the sky. With the help of a king-level high-grade divine artifact, he had already escaped more than 30,000 miles. In order to survive, he no longer cared about his dignity and dignity. He would rather abandon tens of thousands of guards and 30 god kings. Of course, that was not abandonment, that was sacrifice. He wanted to sacrifice those tens of thousands of guards and 30 god kings to buy himself time to escape. As he fled, he was still praying in his heart. I hope that guy is delayed and doesn't chase after me. Even if he kills everyone in the divine splendor grotto heaven, I can't die. But unfortunately, the heavenly lion region lord's prayers were destined to be useless. Ji Tianxing also teleported continuously high in the sky and chased after the heavenly lion region lord at an even more unbelievable speed. In a short 5 breaths, both parties flew more than 10,000 miles. Finally, Ji Tianxing appeared in front of the heavenly lion region lord and easily intercepted him. Bam! The heavenly lion region lord only saw a mountain-sized dragon elephant phantom appear in front of him. Before he could dodge, he was blasted back. Plop! He flew a few hundred miles and smashed into a 1,000-foot mountain peak, causing smoke and dust to fly up into the sky. When he crawled out of the ruins, he was already covered in blood. His hair was disheveled and he was in an extremely sorry state. At this moment, Ji Tianxing appeared in front of him. He waved his hand and shot out a golden dragon claw to capture him. The heavenly lion region lord could no longer dodge or resist. He was imprisoned by the golden dragon claw and could not move. End of chapter. Chapter 4006. After the heavenly lion region lord was captured, he knew that he would not be able to escape and was filled with despair. He waited for a long time and prayed that the god of the underworld would arrive in time. However, a miracle did not appear. Even so, he did not give up hope and continued to struggle. Now that I have fallen into your hands, shouldn't you at least reveal your name and title? Lord Supreme calls you a formidable opponent. Don't tell me you don't even have the courage to do so? The heavenly lion region lord glared at Ji Tianxing unwillingly and roared in a hoarse voice. He asked this question because he wanted to know more about his death and also because he wanted to stall for time. Ji Tianxing ignored him and released his divine power to imprison his divine body and divine spark. Then he carried him and flew back. Soon the two of them returned to the battlefield. Above the ruins within a radius of 1,000 miles, the battle was still ongoing. Ji Tianxing's 9 doppelgangers had killed 20 of the 30 godly kings from the foreign tribes. The remaining 10 god kings who were riddled with wounds were all terrified. They no longer dared to fight, dodging and fleeing the entire time. 5,000 godly lords had surrounded Yun Yao and the others for so long, but they had not killed anyone. On the contrary, the number of guards had been reduced to around 2,000. As for Yun Yao, Ji Ku and the others, although they were covered in blood and looked miserable, they were not seriously injured. The blood that soaked their hair and clothes belonged to the foreign tribes' guards. Ji Tianxing carried the imprisoned heavenly lion region lord and flew into the sky above the battlefield. He shouted, "Stop! Your region lord has been captured by me. If you don't stop, I will kill him." As his voice spread in all directions, more than 2,000 foreign tribes were stunned. Everyone stopped fighting and looked up at the sky. Their gazes fell on Ji Tianxing. Seeing that the wretched heavenly lion region lord had been captured by Ji Tianxing, the guards and the 10 godly kings lost all hope. Even the domain lord was heavily injured and captured by a strong enemy. What reason did they have to continue fighting? All of a sudden, the morale of these non-humankind warriors vanished. Everyone stopped fighting and killing. Even the 10,000 guards on the outer ring lowered their hands and put down their weapons. Peace was restored between heaven and earth. Ji Tianxing recalled his 9 clones and summoned the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda, allowing Yun Yao, Ji Ku and the others to return to the distorted spacetime to recuperate. When they received this order, Qian Yu, Black Dragon and White Dragon were still somewhat unsatisfied. They were still in the midst of fighting and hadn't enjoyed themselves to the fullest. However, they knew that Ji Tianxing had plans, so they obeyed his orders and entered the divine pagoda one by one. Soon, only Ji Tianxing was left on the battlefield, facing more than 10,000 guards alone. Of course, there were also 30,000 guards and servants who had fled far away when the mountains and palaces collapsed. Those 30,000 people hid tens of thousands of miles away and were nervously watching the situation on the battlefield. To put it simply, Ji Tianxing was facing more than 40,000 non-humankind warriors from the divine splendor grotto heaven alone. However, his aura was too majestic and powerful. It suppressed the entire battlefield, causing everyone to be filled with fear and not dare to resist. Ji Tianxing looked around and looked at the domain lord of the heavenly lion region. He sneered and said, "Do you see? Just now you abandoned everyone and ran for your life alone. Now I have captured you, but none of these divine emperors came to save you." The domain lord of the heavenly lion region was sad and a little angry. However, he didn't show it. He said with a solemn expression, "Your target is me, not my people. If this seat's death can give them a way out, this seat will not shirk my duty." Hearing his impassioned words, the tens of thousands of non-humankind warriors were moved. Many of them looked ashamed. However, Ji Tianxing frowned and said in a low voice, "You are still acting when you are about to die? You are really a hypocrite. Forget it, I don't want to waste my time with you." After he finished speaking, he carried the domain lord of the heavenly lion region and flew toward the exit of the divine splendor grotto heaven. The domain lord of the heavenly lion region thought for a moment and felt that the situation was a little strange. He asked, "I have no enmity with you. Why did you attack me? You captured me but didn't kill me. What do you want?" Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "You are the god of the underworld's lackey, so I want to deal with you. I didn't kill you because you are still useful." The domain lord of the heavenly lion region said in a low voice, "So your target is Lord Supreme and I am just an innocent victim? Then why did you leave the divine splendor grotto heaven in such a hurry? Are you afraid that Lord Supreme will turn you into ashes when he returns?" Ji Tianxing sneered and said, "You are waiting for the god of the underworld to come, and so am I. However, I will not wait for him in the divine splendor grotto heaven. I want to take the initiative." The domain lord of the heavenly lion region vaguely understood something and guessed that Ji Tianxing had follow-up plans and conspiracies. But that had nothing to do with him. It was all to deal with the god of the underworld. He asked again, "Until now you still haven't told me who you are. You are not qualified to know my honorific title." Ji Tianxing glanced at him coldly and waved his hand to strike him. Bang! With a muffled sound, the domain lord of the heavenly lion region fainted on the spot and stopped talking. Ji Tianxing flew toward the exit of the grotto heaven while dealing with the domain lord. He threw him into the third level of the Jutian Tenju Tower. In that space, the evil soul divine king was still suppressed and he was still alive. Now that both of them were suppressed inside, they had company. At this moment, the sky in front of Ji Tianxing suddenly lit up with a divine light. There was also a loud and majestic voice that came from the exit of the grotto heaven. "Kenshin, since you are here, stay." The sudden voice reverberated between heaven and earth within a radius of 100,000 miles. Ji Tianxing's pupils constricted immediately. He stopped in the sky and stared at the divine light that was rapidly approaching. There were actually 6 figures in that divine light within a radius of 100 miles. The divine light kept flashing high in the sky. Every time it flashed, it would teleport 20,000 miles away. In just a few breaths, the divine light swept across the sky and arrived in front of Ji Tianxing. Swoosh! After the bright golden divine light dissipated, 6 figures appeared. They were 100 miles away from Ji Tianxing, facing each other in the sky. Both sides stared at each other and sized each other up. Among the 6 experts, 4 were from the god race of the god world, and 2 were foreign races from the starry skies. The leader was a burly middle-aged man who was more than 10 feet tall. This person was dressed in a black robe and wore a black ghost mask. He wore a luxurious divine crown on his head. His body was surrounded by a black death aura and the space around him was empty. The empty space of 30 feet could isolate divine sense from probing and resist the invasion of various divine powers. There was no doubt that this black-robed ghost-masked man was one of the avatars of the god of the underworld. Following behind the god of the underworld were 5 people. There was a peak divine king from the god clan, 2 ninth-degree divine kings from the god clan and 2 ninth-degree divine kings from the alien clan. End of chapter. Chapter 4007. The god of the underworld's incarnation had already surpassed the divine king realm. Even Ji Tianxing could not see the depth of his power. As for the 5 god kings behind him, their strength was extremely deep as well. 1 peak god king and 4 ninth stage realm god kings. No matter which star region these few people were placed in, they were a powerful force. If the god of the underworld and the 5 divine kings had arrived when Ji Tianxing and the Sky Lion region lord were fighting, the Sky Lion region lord would definitely be rescued. Unfortunately, the god of the underworld and the 5 divine kings were too late. Fortunately, the Sky Lion region lord was unconscious and did not know. If he knew that he would be able to see a miracle if he delayed a little longer waiting for the god of the underworld to return, he would definitely think of ways to delay the time. But there were no ifs in this world, only results. The god of the underworld stood proudly in the sky and looked at Ji Tianxing. He said indifferently, "Kenshin, after 1,000 years we meet again." Ji Tianxing looked at him coldly and said, "You definitely did not expect that I would be reborn and appear in front of you again." The Netherworld Divine Emperor nodded slightly. Under the pitch-black ghostly mask, his pair of gray eyes revealed a hint of a smile. "Indeed, for the past 1,000 years, I had forgotten about you and did not expect you to be reborn. It's just that 100 years ago my incarnation came to the lower realm and met a guy who looked very similar to you. Although this emperor had easily killed that guy, he was still able to do so. But from then on, I realized that something was wrong and guessed that you might have been reborn. Decades ago, you caused a storm of blood in the god realm and escaped to the reincarnation island. It was at that time that I received the news that you had been reborn. Since ancient times, who could reincarnate with their memories after their body and soul were destroyed? Only you did it. You are indeed the strongest divine king in the world." When he said this, the god of the underworld's tone was somewhat emotional. His praise for Ji Tianxing was also very sincere. But he changed the topic and sneered, "It's a pity that after your rebirth, you spent a few hundred years to recover to the peak of the divine king realm. But you found out that we were already the god of the underworld. Back then the 5 of us had to join forces to kill you. But now this emperor's incarnation can kill you 1,000 times over. You have been reborn, but you have to die again. Do you feel very desperate?" The Netherworld Divine Emperor looked as if victory was within his grasp. His eyes were filled with pity as he looked at Ji Tianxing. The 5 god kings behind him also revealed mocking sneers. In their eyes, the sword god who had once shaken the world was already a dead man. However, Ji Tianxing wasn't angry. Instead, he asked expressionlessly, "This prince was killed by you once. How can I repeat the same mistake and die again? Moreover, I am not the same as I was back then. I'm afraid your incarnation can't do anything to me." The god of the underworld was not in a hurry to make a move. Of course, he was not in a hurry either. While he was adjusting his divine power to the best state, he was also secretly observing the god of the underworld's incarnation. But all incarnations and clones had a common problem. They could not cultivate on their own and could not replenish their divine power. Once their power was exhausted, the incarnation and clones would collapse. In addition, the farther the incarnation and clones were from the main body, the less power they could unleash. When Ji Tianxing's incarnation fought side by side with him, they were extremely close and had half of the main body's strength. This was unparalleled in the world, one of a kind. Under normal circumstances, incarnations and clones only had 20% of the main body's strength. The further they were from the main body, the more their strength would weaken. For example, the dragon emperors of the dragon realm. Their main bodies were in outer space and their incarnations and clones were in the dragon realm. They only had 10% of their strength. When the god of the underworld's incarnation descended, not only was it extremely far away, but it was also suppressed and weakened by the heavenly Tao. That incarnation only had 1% of the main body's strength. Therefore, Ji Tianxing judged that the god of the underworld's incarnation only had 10% of the main body's strength at most. Although he is a god emperor, and this incarnation has surpassed the divine king realm and has the aura of a god emperor, 10% of the main body's strength is 10%. However, this clone only had 10% of the original body's strength. Its true battle prowess was definitely not as strong as a real god emperor. Its battle strength should be between a peak divine king and a god emperor. After reaching this conclusion, Ji Tianxing felt more at ease and more confident. While Ji Tianxing was observing the god of the underworld was also observing him. Seeing that he was so confident, the god of the underworld's eyes flashed with surprise. He said calmly, "In terms of appearance and aura, you are no different from before. However, you are indeed stronger than before and your foundation is deeper. Even so, you are only a peak Divine King. You probably don't know how big the gap is between the Divine King realm and the God Emperor realm. You have not taken the final step, but I have. I have transcended all living beings and stood above all worlds. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and sneered. If your main body were here, such a long and confident speech would be somewhat convincing. But you are just an incarnation, not the real God Emperor. What is there to fear? The god of the underworld was furious when he saw the contempt in his tone and expression. He stopped talking nonsense with Ji Tianxing. His eyes and aura turned cold as he growled, "Then I would like to see how much stronger you are compared to before. How dare you be so arrogant?" As soon as he finished speaking, the Netherworld God Emperor waved his hand and gave the order to attack. The peak Divine Kings and 4 9th-degree Divine Kings behind him had already taken out their divine weapons and were ready to attack. After receiving the God of the Underworld's order, the 5 Divine Kings did not hesitate. They waved their weapons and used their various skills to besiege Ji Tianxing. Swoosh. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Dazzling divine light covered the sky. Violent divine power exploded and created a hurricane in the sky. Dozens of sharp blades of divine light slashed toward Ji Tianxing with a godly might that could destroy everything. The joint attack of 5 Divine King powerhouses. The power was so powerful that even ordinary peak Divine Kings would have to retreat, unable to withstand it. However, Ji Tianxing's body was covered in a layer of golden light. He waved his sword and slashed out dozens of sword lights. He easily dispelled the attacks from all directions. He still stood at the same spot and did not move an inch. Seeing this, the god of the underworld frowned slightly. A cold light flashed in his eyes. As the God Emperor, he was above all living beings. His status was so noble that he naturally disdained to make the first move. He let the 5 Divine Kings attack first. Firstly, it was to show his status. Secondly, it was to test Ji Tianxing's background. The result of this test was out. Ji Tianxing's performance was beyond his expectations. He obviously had a strong foundation and was far stronger than ordinary peak Divine Kings. At least, the god of the underworld could conclude that the 5 Divine Kings under him were no match for Ji Tianxing. Chapter 4008. The god of the underworld had a rough understanding of Ji Tianxing's strength after just one exchange. However, he continued to watch the battle patiently. He also wanted to see if Ji Tianxing was able to hold on or if he had real skills. Kill. Die. Kenshin, go to hell. The 5 Divine Kings were enraged by Ji Tianxing's reaction. They felt that Ji Tianxing was too arrogant. At the same time, they had embarrassed themselves in front of the God Emperor. The 5 of them roared angrily and unleashed their full strength. They once again used their divine skills and attacked Ji Tianxing from all directions. This time they attacked in anger. They unleashed their divine powers recklessly and the divine skills they used were even stronger. Rumble. Swoosh. Swoosh. Swish. 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 In the divine light that covered the sky, there were not only divine lightning but also hundreds of sword shadows and flames that covered the sky. Even the ground within a 10,000-mile radius was covered by the divine light and was destroyed into ruins by the violent force. However, Ji Tianxing was fearless. He waved the burial of heaven indifferently and formed a sword net around him. Bam, 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 boom, crack. The divine skills that filled the sky crashed down and collided with the sword light. There was a deafening explosion that reverberated between heaven and earth. The divine skills of the 5 Divine Kings were once again blocked and neutralized by Ji Tianxing. He looked calm and seemed to be doing it effortlessly. He was also unharmed. The 5 Divine Kings seemed to have been greatly humiliated. They were all furious and their eyes were burning with anger and killing intent. All this time they had been the trusted aides of the god of the underworld. They had a noble status and could do anything they wanted. Yet now, even with the 5 of them joining forces, they couldn't even harm a single hair on Ji Tianxing's head. However, the god of the underworld was watching with his own eyes. Didn't this prove that they were useless? Oh, you damned bastard, I'm going to tear you apart. So what if your defense is strong? Let's see how many moves you can last. The Divine Kings let out furious roars as they once again brandished their divine weapons and launched a third round of attacks. This time Ji Tianxing not only cast a spell to block their attacks, but also took advantage of the situation to launch a counterattack. Sky-breaking sword. Daylight sword. Dragon elephant divine fist. Ji Tianxing used the blurry golden light to protect himself as he waved the burial of heaven with all his might, slashing towards the 4 ninth stage realm god kings. Rumble. Ping ping ping. With a deafening boom, the attacks of the 5 god kings were destroyed. They turned into shards of divine light that scattered in the sky. Immediately after, Ji Tianxing's dragon elephant fist and daylight sword struck the 4 god kings. Peef. The 2 god race god kings were sent flying by the dragon elephant fist. Blood spurted out from their 7 orifices as they were sent flying hundreds of miles away. The 2 foreign race god kings were more unlucky as they were swallowed by the daylight sword. Their bodies melted like snow and turned into a pool of blood. The 3rd round of attacks ended with the 2 foreign race god kings' bodies being destroyed while the other 2 god race god kings were severely injured. The remaining 2 foreign race god kings were shocked and furious as they fled back to the god of the underworld side. The 2 severely injured god race god kings suppressed their injuries and returned to the god of the underworld side, glaring at Ji Tianxing. The 2 of them were furious and wanted to curse Ji Tianxing. At this moment, the god of the underworld who had been watching the battle finally spoke. Not bad. Not bad at all. As the god of the underworld spoke, he couldn't help but clap and cheer. He stared deeply at Ji Tianxing and sneered, "No wonder you're so confident. Now it seems that you've improved a lot. But let me tell you, as long as you don't take the last step, it's useless and you're destined to die." As soon as he finished speaking, he personally made a move. Then he slowly raised his palms and channeled a vast amount of god power. He slowly slapped towards Ji Tianxing. "My will is the will of the heavens. Under the heavenly axiom, all are ants." Heaven flipping palm. As the god of the underworld let out a low roar, 2 huge black and white palm shadows carrying the mysterious power of the heavenly axiom descended from the sky and slammed toward Ji Tianxing. Even though the speed of the 2 palm silhouettes was not fast, they were like 2 enormous mountains slowly descending from the sky. However, the pressure that these 2 palm shadows brought to Ji Tianxing was unprecedentedly great. In comparison, the pressure from the 5 god kings attacking him was less than 20% of the pressure from these 2 palm shadows. This was the first time Ji Tianxing faced an expert who could control the power of the heavenly axiom since his rebirth. Under the suppression of the 2 palm shadows, he could clearly feel how terrifying the power of the heavenly axiom was. The invisible power of the heavenly axiom pressed down like 2 enormous mountains that pressed down on his heart. It also felt like the heavens and earth were closing in and were about to crush him. That trace of power of the heavenly axiom exceeded the scope of divine power and made people feel reverence and fear from the bottom of their hearts. Fortunately, for some reason, Ji Tianxing did not resist or fear the power of the heavenly axiom. His expression was solemn as he resisted the terrifying pressure and waved the burial of heaven to slash out 2 huge swords that could split the heavens and earth. Boom. Crack. The 2 huge swords carried 5-colored divine light as they violently slashed at the 2 palm shadows. Following 2 deafening explosions, the sword lights collapsed on the spot and scattered into countless golden fragments. The 2 mountain-sized black and white palm shadows also collapsed and disintegrated in the turbulence. Of course, there was still an invisible suppressive force that slammed into Ji Tianxing. But Ji Tianxing's body flashed with golden light as he used the powerful defense of the indestructible golden body to neutralize the impact. He was unscathed and successfully blocked the attack of the god of the underworld. The god kings did not expect such an outcome, and it also stunned the god of the underworld. A look of surprise flashed across his eyes. How is this possible? He actually blocked the attack of the god emperor? Is he really just a peak god king? The 3 god kings of the god race were stunned as they looked at Ji Tianxing in disbelief. They had thought that the god of the underworld would be able to easily kill Ji Tianxing. Even if he could not kill Ji Tianxing in one move, he would be able to severely injure him. But they did not expect the outcome to be like this. Just as the 3 of them were stunned, the god of the underworld shouted in a dignified tone, "What are you waiting for? Have you forgotten your mission?" Hearing the voice of the god of the underworld, the 3 god kings were awakened from their daze and fear appeared on their faces. They quickly brandished their divine weapons and charged in from 3 directions, joining forces with the god of the underworld to attack Ji Tianxing. At this moment they did not care about bullying him with numbers. They only wanted to complete their mission. The god of the underworld's eyes were cold as he exuded a chilling aura. He cast a spell and summoned a 4-foot-long pitch-black divine sword. This sword was called the Sword of Death, and it was also a supreme-grade king-level divine weapon. The god of the underworld stared at Ji Tianxing and shouted angrily, "I did not expect you to have a supreme-grade divine weapon to protect yourself. I have miscalculated. In that case I have no choice but to use my weapon to show you the power of the Sword of Death." You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.